Chapter 12:38. So be it, who cares if they don't come back ever again? Give the heavenly arcana immortal fruits back to us. Squeak, squeak. The 2 hounds and 1 mouse were thoroughly provoked, causing them to retaliate. Give them back? If it weren't for the heavenly arcana immortal fruits, we would have killed you long ago. We wouldn't even give you a chance. The 3 statues uttered hollow laughs. Trying to take back the fruits that were already in their hands? That was simply wishful thinking. You! The 2 hounds clenched their teeth furiously. They did not expect the 3 statues to be so shameless. Seniors, the Heavenly Fortune tribe doesn't have such a rule, so there's no need for you to pick on us, right? Furthermore, if the 3 seniors are determined, then don't blame this junior for turning hostile. At that instant, Qin Nan spoke with a calm expression. Master! The 2 hounds, 1 mouse, and skeleton Xiao Hong were startled as they realized something. The 3 statues were slightly startled. When they came back to their senses, they immediately let out a deafening laugh. Ha ha, you're turning your back on us? We would like to see how a mere peak martial ancestor realm expert is going to turn his back on us? I'll repeat myself, there's no way you can enter the Heavenly Fortune tribe. While speaking, the 3 statues glanced at Qin Nan with disdainful gazes. They would not believe a mere peak martial ancestor realm cultivator would dare to harm them. How was that any different from committing suicide? However, before they could finish their words, a voice suddenly rang out. A terrifying aura burst out from Qin Nan's body. You're asking for it, break? Qin Nan's eyes turned cold. His hair danced wildly as he stepped forward. The heaven-shattering saber in his hand fired wisps of saber intent slashing at the 3 statues. He had taken their heavenly arcana immortal fruits, and he was trying to stop them. Did he really think they were easy targets? You! The 3 statues were stunned. This mere peak martial ancestor realm human dared to attack them. How bold! The 3 statues collected their thoughts and became infuriated. Their monarch force burst out from their bodies as they raised their palms and executed several monarch arts in Qin Nan's direction. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page, shrouded towards the south. Even though they were not martial monarchs, their authority was not something a mere peak martial ancestor realm human could challenge. Destruction domain, sky desolating saber art. Qin Nan's eyes showed no sign of fear. He unleashed the destruction domain to resist the monarch art. Meanwhile, the heaven-shattering saber in his hand emitted a shocking glow, which slashed at the 3 statues as if it had come from an ancient era. Bang bang! A series of explosions took place instantly. The entire Heavenly Fortune Palace began to tremble vigorously at that instant. Even though the 3 statues were quite powerful, they were not real first-layer martial monarchs. Qin Nan's battle intent, his left arm, left eye, and the sharpness of the heaven-shattering saber allowed him to hold his ground for the time being. Instead, he was suppressing the 3 statues. No wonder you dare to attack us. It seems like I've underestimated you. However, a martial ancestor is still a martial ancestor. You dare to act recklessly here? Tripartite Heavenly Arcana Formation. The red statue uttered a roar. At that instant, the 3 statues spread out and surrounded Qin Nan. A strong Heavenly Arcana force burst out from their bodies, resulting in a great pressure crushing onto Qin Nan's figure. The pressure continued to rise rapidly. Even the flesh of the battle dragon would shatter into pieces within 5 breaths' time under the pressure, let alone Qin Nan. Break! Qin Nan remained calm. He scanned with his left eye and locked onto the statue's position. With a slash, the pressure was shattered instantly. Such a powerful eye technique to be able to see through the formation. However, do you really think that's all the tripartite Heavenly Arcana formation is capable of? The eyes of the 3 statues flickered with disdain. However, before they could make their moves, Qin Nan stomped the ground as 6 terrifying auras were awakened behind him. Martial trees unleashed, suppress. Following this, 6 martial trees sprang into the sky. Each of them unleashed a terrifying might and crushed down onto the 3 statues. Bang bang bang! 3 earth-shattering explosions were heard. The figures of the 3 statues sank into the ground. Their eyes were filled with astonishment. 6 martial trees? Has he surpassed the rules of cultivation? None of them had ever expected such a thing to happen. In their eyes, Qin Nan was only a powerful martial ancestor in the martial ancestor realm. That being said, it was understandable. Even though some of the people of the Heavenly Fortune tribe had heard of Qin Nan's name, they had spent most of their time guarding the Heavenly Fortune Palace, thus they were unaware of anything else. Divine Battle Spirit. Golden Seal. Qin Nan's attack did not stop there. The 6th grade Tian-ranked Divine Battle Spirit floated into the air and unleashed a terrifying suppression onto the figures of the 3 statues. The mysterious golden seal emitted rays of golden light, as if it had condensed into 3 golden mountains, which also pressed down. Bang bang bang! Despite the outstanding strength of the 3 statues, they still suffered a great blow at that instant. A series of explosions took place on their bodies, preventing them from moving. What are you waiting for? I can only suppress them temporarily. Go inside at once. Qin Nan turned around and yelled at Skeleton Xiaohong, the 2 hounds and 1 mouse. Master! Skeleton Xiaohong, the 2 hounds and 1 mouse wore blank expressions. They were well aware of Qin Nan's strength. However, the 3 statues before them possessed strength equivalent to the first-layer martial monarch realm, and they were able to control the power of the Heavenly Fortune Palace to strengthen themselves, further enhancing their strength. Since Qin Nan had helped them, they might be able to enter the gate, but what about Qin Nan? Don't worry, don't you trust my capabilities? Go inside at once. If you don't, I'll sever all ties with you. Qin Nan snapped. Master we. The 2 hounds and the Heavenly Fortune mouse froze in their tracks. That's enough, let's go. Skeleton Xiaohong collected her thoughts and clenched her right fist as if she had made a great decision. She reached out her left hand and grabbed the 2 hounds and 1 mouse, before leaping into the glowing door. She finally understood something, thus there was no need to explain further. She could only try her best not to let him down. Qin Nan felt relieved seeing this. You dare to let them go, aren't you afraid of death? The eyes of the 3 statues flickered furiously upon seeing this, as they were on the verge of exploding due to Qin Nan's actions. Ha, afraid of death? I'm not afraid at all. Besides, if I don't protect my people, who is going to protect them? Qin Nan burst out laughing as his battle intent surged. He raised the heaven-shattering saber in his hand and slashed forward with a shocking glow. End of chapter. Chapter 1239. Then you're quite a loyal and righteous person. Heavenly Fortune Palace, strengthen me. The red statue's face was gloomy, and his hands suddenly formed a mysterious seal. Initially, it did not want to use the move, as it would inflict significant damage to them. However, the strength of the human before it had completely exceeded its imagination, thus it had no choice but to use it now. At that moment, the entire mysterious heavenly palace began to tremble violently. From the 1st floor to the 9th floor, a powerful force was awakened. Streams of majestic, mysterious heavenly energy surged out from the depths of the palace and poured into the 3 statues. The auras of the 3 statues skyrocketed, as if they had merged with the palace into one marvelous fist. The 3 statues uttered a roar and threw a punch forward at the same time. Although the punch seemed simple, it was not as simple as it seemed, as if there were countless punches stacked on top of one another. Bang! The 6 martial trees, the divine battle spirit, and the mysterious golden seal that were suppressing the statues were knocked flying by the terrifying fist intent, allowing the three statues to regain their freedom. Die! The three statues unleashed powerful auras as they executed various monarch arts. However, unlike the previous time, each of the monarch arts was fully utilized in their hands, resulting in an incredible force that could shake mountains and rivers, and destroy the sun and moon. Battle! Qin Nan showed no sign of fear. He fully utilized the power of the 6 martial trees, the divine battle spirit, and the mysterious golden seal to their maximum potential as he charged forward. Bang bang bang! A series of explosions took place. The battle this time was even fiercer and more intense than the previous one. However, unlike the last time, the strength of the three statues had skyrocketed after receiving the buff. Each of their attacks completely sealed off Qin Nan's movements, causing him to be knocked backward continuously. His blood and qi became restless at a rapid pace. At this rate, I won't stand a chance against them. If that's the case, I shall destroy the entire Heavenly Fortune Palace. Qin Nan mumbled to himself as he activated his left eye of the divine god of battle to scan the entire palace. Even though the Heavenly Fortune Palace was a terrifying rare artifact that had been modified by an ancient authority, its secrets were completely exposed by the left eye. In just 10 breaths of time, Qin Nan had locked onto the divine palace. This chapter does not end. Please turn the page. 10 positions. These 10 positions were where powerful forces gathered. As long as Qin Nan cut them apart, it would affect the power of the entire divine palace. The opportunity has come. Mysterious sword, kill. The three statues immediately noticed a flaw in Qin Nan's defense. They uttered a roar and unleashed their heavenly fortune force, which transformed into a long sword that seemed to contain all the secrets of the world, before slashing at Qin Nan. Golden Seal Protection. Left arm. Qin Nan was already prepared. He activated the golden seal, and a circle of golden light enveloped his body. His body also bent slightly, and his left arm was placed in front of him. Bang! Countless sword intents were unleashed. The golden glow encapsulating Qin Nan's figure was shattered, as if he had just received a great blow, causing him to fall toward the bottom of the Heavenly Fortune Palace, smashing the walls into pieces. Humph! You must be severely injured after receiving the attack, right? Don't worry, we won't kill you so easily. We will torture you with countless Heavenly Fortune punishments. The three statues uttered hollow laughs upon seeing this. However, in less than 2 breaths' time, the smiles on their faces stiffened. They could only see Qin Nan's figure that was falling rapidly, suddenly emitting a brilliant saber glow as he slashed at one of the walls on the 5th floor of the Heavenly Fortune Palace. Crap, we've been tricked. The three statues immediately collected their thoughts and wore unpleasant expressions. It was most likely that the human had purposely left the opening open. I can't help but be impressed. Your eye technique is most likely comparable to the Heavenly Fortune godly eyes of our tribe. You're able to see through the entire Heavenly Fortune Palace. However, the Heavenly Fortune Palace was refined by our master with the Heavenly Fortune Stone. It would take you at least 100 attacks to break it open. The three statues curled their lips with a hint of mockery. So what if they had been tricked? They still couldn't do anything to them. Bang! A loud explosion took place. The heaven-shattering saber in Qin Nan's hand had slashed the wall in half with brute force, shattering the formations and runes inside it into pieces. The entire mysterious heavenly palace shuddered as the aura it emitted began to turn chaotic. The eyes of the three statues were filled with astonishment upon seeing this. That was the Heavenly Fortune Stone. Even the saber glow of the godly saber would not be able to break it open so easily. Had the young man managed to shatter it with just a single saber glow? Sky-desolating saber art. Qin Nan had long expected this. As the statues were still immersed in their astonishment, he swung his saber once again, firing 36 streams of saber intents filled with the sky-desolating force into his surroundings. Crap! The three statues were astounded as they collected their thoughts. They immediately executed a series of monarch arts to shatter the saber intent. Even though their reaction was extremely quick, it was still too late. 7 streams of saber intents landed on the key points of the palace, shattering it into pieces. Buzz! At this moment, the entire divine palace began to tremble. It sounded like a mournful wail. The powerful aura that had erupted began to weaken rapidly. It was extremely chaotic. The power of heaven's secrets that had supported the three statues also began to dissipate rapidly. It was far less than 1/5 of what it had been before. It's going to be more interesting this way. Qin Nan's lips curled upward as he executed the unstoppable step. His figure turned into a ray of light as he flew toward the three statues. Damn it, the three statues cursed in their hearts. However, they had no choice but to fight with their monarch arts. The battle continued. The weakness of the three statues was gradually exposed. After all, they were refined by someone else. Even though their minds were engraved with the memories of martial arts, they were not experienced enough. Thus they were unable to nullify the attacks perfectly. However, Qin Nan was different. He had fought against the Xianwind martial monarch and the Thunder Rock monarch beast many times, thus he was quite familiar with the strength of martial monarchs. In addition to that, as the battle continued, his blood and battle intent grew stronger, as if he was a peerless godly saber, whose saber glow grew brighter. This won't do. I have no choice but to use it. The red statue's expression changed rapidly. It clenched its teeth and transmitted its voice to the other two statues. Alright, let's use it. The other two statues nodded in agreement as if they had made up their minds. Heavenly Fortune Seal, shaking the heavens and connecting the gods. The three statues immediately backed away and performed an obscure hand seal. At the same time, they fired a magical force toward the ancient painting hanging on the white door on the 9th floor of the Heavenly Fortune Palace. At that instant, a terrifying aura swept the place. End of chapter. Chapter 1240. What's that? Qin Nan was startled. The aura was stronger than any of the martial monarchs he had encountered so far. Ha ha ha, do you think you're impressive? You're dead meat now. The three statues burst out laughing. Their eyes were filled with disdain. Even though they would be severely punished for using the ancient drawing, it was more than enough as long as they could kill the human before them. Whoosh! A rapid piercing sound could be heard. A blinding white glow was emitted from the ancient drawing. A hunchbacked figure slowly appeared from the white glow. Her appearance caused the entire space to freeze, causing everything in the world to lose their brilliance. Is that Madame Heavenly Fortune? Qin Nan was startled seeing this, before a strange expression appeared on his face. He did not expect the final trump card of the three statues to summon Madame Heavenly Fortune from the ancient drawing. Even though he did not have a close relationship with Madame Heavenly Fortune, she was quite close to the martial serendipity pavilion. Besides, Madame Heavenly Fortune had allowed the 2 hounds and 1 mouse to acknowledge him as their master, thus there was no way she would harm him. Greetings, Spirit Emperor. The three statues wore respectful expressions as they dropped to their knees and brought their fists together. The Spirit Emperor was the only person in the Heavenly Fortune tribe whose status had surpassed the Patriarch of the Heavenly Fortune tribe. He was the most powerful person in the tribe. What's going on? Why would you summon a stream of my will? Madame Heavenly Fortune's voice was still hoarse, but it was now filled with an imperious aura. Spirit Emperor, this human is too daring to attack us and destroy the Heavenly Fortune Palace. We had no choice but to summon the Spirit Emperor. The three statues trembled in fear as they tried their best to speak in a calm tone. Oh! Madame Heavenly Fortune turned around and glanced at Qin Nan. With a glimpse, her cloudy eyes flickered, as if countless images were flashing in her eyes. It was a terrifying forbidden technique, allowing her to see the past and see what had happened before. The Spirit King did not say anything. Human, this time, not only will you die, but you will also suffer a fate worse than death. It will be extremely miserable. The three statues were overjoyed. Senior, long time no see. At that instant, Qin Nan came forward and brought his fists together. Yes, it has indeed been some time since we last met. Madame Heavenly Fortune nodded. However, when this scene landed in the eyes of the three statues, it was no less than a bolt from the blue. The joy in their hearts was as if a basin of ice water had been poured over them, causing them to become ice cold. What was going on? This human actually knew the Spirit King? Furthermore, from the looks of it, their relationship seemed to be pretty good. The three of you are quite bold. You really know how to abuse your authority. Originally, I wanted to kill you all. However, since you have guarded this place for thousands of years, you have contributed a little. You can drink these 3 cups of wine. Madame Heavenly Fortune glanced at the 3 statues and flicked her finger, causing 3 cups of wine to appear before them. This. Spirit King. Sure. The 3 statues stared at the 3 cups of wine as if they had encountered something terrifying, causing their figures to tremble. Their eyes were filled with great terror, completely losing their previous scornful attitude. However, since the Spirit King had given the order, they did not dare to disobey. They could only withhold their fear and drink the wine. As soon as they drank the wine, they began to cry out in pain, resulting in a miserable appearance. Senior, thanks. Qin Nan brought his fists together. Hee, there's no need for that. Madame Heavenly Fortune let out a hoarse laugh, before she straightened her face and said, Since we've met today, I'll give you a piece of advice. You should be more cautious of the monarch ranking and god ranking. They aren't anything good. Monarch ranking and god ranking? Senior, why is that? Qin Nan was startled hearing this, causing him to blurt out. You're not a martial monarch, thus I can't tell you. Just keep it in mind. Madame Heavenly Fortune shook her head. Thanks, Senior. Qin Nan calmed his thoughts and pondered. Since the sacred Lord Blue Dragon had shown up and revealed the secrets of inheriting the monarch horoscopes for him, he had been holding a grudge against the monarch ranking and god ranking, as well as some speculations. However, according to Madame Heavenly Fortune's words, his speculations were most likely correct. That being said, Qin Nan was still able to guess the answer. To continue with the rest of the chapter, please turn the page. He still had no right to know the secrets of the ancient era and the Kanglan continent. Kid Qin Nan, your business has come to an end. I'll send you off now. Madame Heavenly Fortune said as she flicked her finger, firing a ray of light encapsulating Qin Nan's figure. Qin Nan brought his fists together and expressed his gratitude once again before his figure vanished into thin air. This is quite a surprise. I didn't expect the scheme I set up in the Eastern continent to work again, and it seems like it's related to the 9 half-martial gods too. Even though Qin Nan has failed to achieve the martial monarch realm, thus he won't be of much use to me, but I can still set up a trap 100 years later. After all, Magical Hair and the others won't be able to destroy the South Heaven Gate within 100 years. The South Heaven Gate is not only terrifying but also the person behind it, Madame Heavenly Fortune murmured to herself before she let out a sigh and returned to the drawing. A few breaths later, at the Heavenly Fortune mountain range, following a whoosh, Qin Nan's figure appeared out of nowhere. He picked up the badge and transmitted a message to Princess Meow Meow. The latter soon replied that she had returned to the Lost Herb Garden and was no longer at the Heavenly Fortune mountain range. Let's head back to the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Qin Nan's heart became restless as a thought crossed his mind. Even though he had consumed 45 Heavenly Arcana Immortal Fruits, he still had 46 left, which was more than enough for him. Qin Nan immediately took out the 7 luminaries' sword talisman and transmitted a message. The 7 luminaries' flying sword was constantly on the move. If he wanted to return to the Anti-Heaven Alliance, he would need to know its location through the badge. Songzhi's grave. Qin Nan was startled when he saw the map and the message. The name of the place was quite strange, but he did not overthink it. His figure disappeared into the sky. However, little did Qin Nan know, currently in the Anti-Heaven Palace of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. The illusionist martial monarch's eyes suddenly sprang open, emitting a sharp glow. Qin Nan, you're finally back. Since Qin Nan had entered the heavenly arcana, the martial monarchs did not stay any longer after they had secured enough heavenly arcana sacred fruit. Send a message to Rongtian and Mingkong. I don't believe I can't get rid of you this time. The illusionist martial monarch took out his badge and transmitted a message. His lips curled upward into a cold grin. P.S. 4th update, end of chapter. Chapter 1241. Time gradually passed. 3 days later, Qin Nan successfully returned to the Anti-Heaven Alliance with the 7 luminaries' sword talisman. During this period, apart from a few robberies, Qin Nan did not encounter any danger. It was a smooth journey. However, as soon as Qin Nan's figure landed, an unexpected occurrence took place. He could see a monarch glow approaching from the Anti-Heaven Palace, which transformed into a tiny golden figure staring down at Qin Nan. Elder Qin Nan, as the vice-leader of the Anti-Heaven Palace, I order you to come to the Anti-Heaven Palace at once to discuss something important. The tiny golden figure spoke. The voice belonged to the illusionist martial monarch. You can't wait any longer? Qin Nan squinted. He was not surprised by this, as he already knew that the illusionist martial monarch and the others would not give up so easily. I would like to see what you guys are up to. Qin Nan immediately made up his mind. With a kick, he flew forward. A few breaths later, Qin Nan arrived at the Anti-Heaven Palace. He raised his head and saw the illusionist martial monarch sitting at the center, with martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian on his left and right respectively. It was as if they were trying to pressure Qin Nan. The moment Qin Nan entered the hall, the 3 martial monarchs unleashed their monarch auras, which were as magnificent as mountains. Elder Qin Nan, I believe you've benefited a lot from the heavenly arcana? The illusionist martial monarch spoke with a calm expression, as if he was just asking a normal question. The eyes of martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian flickered as they stared at Qin Nan. It was the legendary heavenly arcana. No one had ever returned after entering it. Qin Nan was the first to do so. As such, the 3 martial monarchs were eager to know what Qin Nan had obtained in the heavenly arcana. Hall leader illusionist, the rumors are too fake. There's no treasure in the heavenly arcana. Qin Nan said indifferently. It seems like this Qin Nan has obtained a lot of good stuff in the heavenly arcana. The 3 martial monarchs were not surprised by Qin Nan's words. They exchanged glances with one another and reached a consensus. If Qin Nan knew what they were thinking, he would not know whether to laugh or cry. What he said was the truth. There were no treasures in the heavenly arcana. Elder Qin Nan, let's not waste our time. You've benefited a lot this time. Even we are ashamed of ourselves, but now Mingkong, Shuang, and I are at a crucial stage. We need the help of the heavenly arcana immortal fruits, not only for us, but for the sake of the entire Anti-Heaven Alliance. How about you give each of us 8 heavenly arcana immortal fruits? Of course, if Elder Qin Nan is willing, then all the past grudges can be written off. If you don't want to, I don't know what will happen. Martial monarch Rongtian raised his cup of tea and took a sip before saying with a calm smile. His tone was calm when he said the first 2 sentences, but his tone was slightly heavier when he said the 3rd sentence. It was quite obvious what he was trying to say. The illusionist martial monarch and martial monarch Mingkong continued to drink their tea in silence as if they did not hear anything. The three had come to a consensus after a discussion. Initially, the illusionist martial monarch was planning to team up with them and take all the heavenly arcana immortal fruits from Qin Nan. However, martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian rejected his suggestion. The reason being that Qin Nan's strength was extraordinary. He could be considered the top martial ancestor, thus they could not afford to ignore him. Besides, the situation now was completely different from when they were at the Upper Arcana Sacred Mountain, thus they could only ask for 8 heavenly arcana immortal fruits each. In addition to that, even though martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian were not fond of Qin Nan, they were not as bad as the illusionist martial monarch. As long as Qin Nan was obedient and lowered his head, they would not bother to harm Qin Nan. Qin Nan's lips curled upward upon hearing this. These three were even more shameless than he had imagined. 8 heavenly arcana immortal fruits for each of them, making a total of 24 heavenly arcana immortal fruit. Were they really going to give them all away just because of a few words? Not to mention, he didn't need to write off all the past grudges. He was no saint. He would never forget the evil deeds that others had done to him. If someone respected him, he would respect them back. If someone offended him, he would pay them back 10 feet. Fellow cultivators, don't try to pressure me with the Anti-Heaven Alliance. I'll say it again, if you want the heavenly arcana immortal fruits, give them to me. I won't be joining you for now, Qin Nan said and flew out of the Anti-Heaven Palace with a flicker. It would be a waste of time if he stayed any longer. This, martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian were stunned seeing this. They had given Qin Nan such a great offer, but not only did Qin Nan reject it, he even left without paying any attention to them. Fellow cultivators, did you see that? We shouldn't have given him a chance from the start. The illusionist martial monarch was overjoyed, but his face remained cold. Who would have thought this Qin Nan would be so full of himself, not knowing his place? Martial monarch Rongtian collected his thoughts with a dark expression. This brat has looked down on us time and time again. He must be punished. We have to teach him a lesson. Illusionist martial monarch, do you have any ideas? Martial monarch Mingkong wore an unpleasant expression too. His eyes flickered with a hint of murderous intent. I do have an idea, but I'll need your help to find the other martial monarchs. When the time comes, the 6 of us will agree to expel Qin Nan from the Anti-Heaven Alliance according to the rules. Once that's done, we can do whatever we want to him. The illusionist martial monarch said with a hollow laugh. I almost forgot about the rules. Let's do it. Martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Mingtian's eyes flickered as they nodded. However, Qin Nan was completely unaware of what was happening at the Anti-Heaven Palace. After leaving the Anti-Heaven Palace, Qin Nan first paid a visit to the Star-Aligning Palace to hand in his quest, before flying to the Mystic Treasure Palace. Elder Qin Nan, welcome. Is there anything I can help you with? Wei Ming immediately stepped forward when he sensed Qin Nan's aura. He brought his fists together and spoke respectfully. Qin Nan gave him a surprised look, but he did not overthink it. He tossed a storage bag into the air and said, Elder Wei Ming, please exchange these for contribution points. Wei Ming received the storage bag and scanned it with his divine sense. His eyes flickered with astonishment as he said, 120 heavenly arcana spiritual fruits and 7 heavenly arcana sacred fruits? He did not expect Qin Nan to offer such a great fortune right from the start. Elder Qin Nan, it's a total of 1,650,000 contribution points. Give me a moment, I'll record it for you. Wei Ming quickly collected his thoughts and said before leaving. Wait, Elder Wei Ming. May I ask how much is one of these? Qin Nan flipped his hand and took out a heavenly arcana immortal fruit. Is this the legendary heavenly arcana immortal fruit? Wei Ming took a glimpse at the fruit, but his eyes were filled with astonishment as he fixed his gaze on it. The heavenly arcana immortal fruit, he had only read about it in ancient records. Phew, I didn't expect you to find a heavenly arcana immortal fruit. It's extremely valuable, and you can't even buy it. One of these fruits is worth 600,000 contribution points. Wei Ming regained his senses, but his breathing was still a little hurried. Oh? 600,000 contribution points? Qin Nan's eyes flickered. He did not expect the value of the heavenly arcana immortal fruit to be higher than he had imagined. He flicked his finger and tossed another storage bag into the air. I'll sell them all. Sell them all? Wei Ming was startled. He subconsciously scanned the storage bag with his divine sense. Following a glance, it felt like a thunderbolt from the 9 heavens had exploded in his mind. End of chapter. Chapter 1242. 25. 25 Heavenly Arcana Immortal Fruits? Wei Ming's face was filled with astonishment. His hand holding the storage bag trembled slightly. He did not expect Qin Nan to be able to offer such a terrifying amount of wealth. However, little did Wei Ming know, Qin Nan had purposely left him 20 heavenly arcana immortal fruits for his future cultivation. If he knew, the shock he would receive would be even greater. Gasp, Elder Qin Nan, including the one just now, there are 26 heavenly arcana immortal fruits in total. Together with the ones before, it's a total of 17,250,000 contribution points. I'll register them for you now, what do you think? After a while, Wei Ming took a deep breath to calm his thoughts and said in a serious tone. On top of that, help me buy the piece of the Kanglan tree, and grant the Alliance leader 2 wishes. Qin Nan said. Sure. Wei Ming turned around and left. Normally, these matters would be settled fairly quickly, but this time, the amount of contribution points involved was simply too much. It took Wei Ming the period it took an incense to burn before he finally arrived. Elder Qin Nan, inside the wooden box is the piece of the Kanglan tree. As for the other 2 badges, if you have any wishes or thoughts, just send a message with your divine sense and the Alliance leader will respond to you. As for the contribution points, you still have 3,775,000 contribution points left. As Wei Ming spoke, he respectfully handed over his storage bag. Finally, it's mine. Qin Nan was overjoyed when he saw the wooden box, as a sense of achievement rose within him. He had gone through all kinds of difficulties in the ancient battleground and fought against the martial monarch. All his efforts had not gone to waste. Thanks, I'll be leaving first. After Qin Nan calmed his thoughts and put away the storage bag, he brought his fists together and flew away with a kick. The illusionist martial monarch and the others will surely be enraged after I rejected their offer, thus they will team up to deal with me. I should go into seclusion to improve my strength. Strength is the only way to go. Qin Nan's eyes flickered. His figure did not fly toward the anti-heaven palace, but in the opposite direction. The small world inside the 7 luminaries' flying sword was extremely spacious. The anti-heaven alliance had only occupied a small part of it. Since Qin Nan was planning to cultivate in seclusion, it went without saying that he had to find a suitable place to cultivate somewhere else. Time gradually passed. Qin Nan's figure flew rapidly in the sky, crossing mountains and forests. Half an hour later, Qin Nan stopped in his tracks. Below them, a huge lake appeared. The lake water was light blue, and there were shadows of dragons and phoenixes on the surface of the lake. They were all condensed from spiritual energy. In addition to that, the lake contained a strange force that prevented him from peeking through it with his divine sense. Even Qin Nan's left eye of the divine god of battle could barely peek into it. This is it. Qin Nan didn't hesitate at all. With a tap of his foot, he dove into the lake and reached the bottom. Heaven-shattering saber, I'll leave it to you to protect me while I'm cultivating in seclusion. Qin Nan transmitted his thought. Following a buzz, his right arm slowly broke into pieces and transformed into the heaven-shattering saber. The heaven-shattering saber danced in the air and tapped Qin Nan's shoulder with its tip before sticking into the ground a distance away. Qin Nan was relieved seeing this. Even though the heaven-shattering saber did not have a saber spirit, it did possess a strong intelligence. It would not be a problem to protect him. Kanglan tree, refine it. Qin Nan took out the wooden box and opened it. A shocking intent was inserted into the wooden block the size of a palm. Bang! Following a loud explosion, the wooden block shattered into pieces and emitted a shocking green glow. Wisps of the power of the Kanglan tree surged toward Qin Nan. If someone were to be above the lake right now, they would discover that the entire lake had turned green. The trees and flowers around the lake began to tremble vigorously. As for Qin Nan, his figure underwent a brand new transformation at that instant. He could only see the divine battle spirit floating behind him. The 6 rays of red light turned into 7 rays of red light at that instant. Previously, the divine battle spirit had yet to rank up after refining the pieces of the Kanglan tree. It had only ranked up this time. Following this, the trunks, branches, and leaves of the 6 martial trees in Qin Nan's body emitted a brilliant glow. The mysterious runes that were formed previously turned into mysterious symbols at that instant. It was as if each symbol was. The numbers all corresponded to the principles of heaven and earth. At that instant, even though the 6 martial trees were still 10 zhang tall, and were still rare phenomenon martial trees, their power was a lot more terrifying than before, as they were now filled with more secrets. As I thought, when the 9 martial trees merged into 6 martial trees, and the 6 martial trees grew stronger, the force of the Kanglan tree required to merge them into a single martial tree would be extremely terrifying. It's nowhere enough for now. I believe the remaining force of the Kanglan tree should be enough to merge them into 3 martial trees, but I'm not sure if I can merge them into 2 martial trees. Qin Nan was not disappointed seeing this. His eyes flickered as he unleashed his divine sense. Either way, he had to give it a try. Merge! Qin Nan let out a roar. He immediately controlled the 4 divine battle trees with his divine sense and merged them with the force of the Kanglan tree into a magical whole, before merging them with the remaining destruction martial tree and divine battle tree. Buzz buzz buzz. At that instant, the 6 martial trees began to tremble vigorously as a strong will burst out from them. They were resisting, and their resistance was even stronger than before. Golden seal. Qin Nan was long prepared for this. He let out a roar. The mysterious golden seal instantly emitted a golden glow, which transformed into a golden mountain that crushed down onto the 4 divine battle trees. Might of the divine god of battle, will of the divine god of battle. Qin Nan did not stop there. He activated the divine battle spirit and unleashed the might of the divine god of battle toward the 4 divine battle trees. At that instant, although the 4 divine battle trees were still struggling vigorously, they were a lot weaker than before. They gradually calmed down and collapsed, turning into streams of force of the divine battle tree that merged with the other 2 martial trees. It worked! Qin Nan let out a relieved sigh. Is that? Qin Nan suddenly sensed something. His gaze was fixed onto the remaining destruction martial tree and the divine battle tree. The 2 martial trees began to evolve rapidly. In addition to that, a terrifying aura was being born and accumulating at the center of the trunks. The aura was unprecedented. End of chapter. Chapter 1243. At that instant, a strange feeling arose in Qin Nan's heart. Thump thump thump. His heart seemed to be affected by something. It was beating at an unprecedented speed, and the blood in his body began to boil rapidly. Are you summoning me? Qin Nan stared at the 2 martial trees in disbelief. Could it be that the two martial trees had gained their own consciousness after the evolution? The martial ancestors' martial tree was formed by the sacred force of the martial sacred realm, thus it was a martial tree. Even though it possessed a certain level of intelligence, it was impossible for it to gain its own consciousness. You want my blood? For some reason, Qin Nan suddenly came to a realization. The two martial trees were summoning him, which meant that they needed his blood. Go! Qin Nan did not hesitate, nor did he overthink it. He pricked the tip of his finger and fired 2 drops of blood into the two martial trees. At that instant Qin Nan felt as if he had become one with them, as if there was no difference between them. It was as if the two martial trees had merged with his body and soul. Whoosh! At that instant the two martial trees unleashed a shocking force, which slashed the giant lake in half like 2 peerless swords being drawn out from their sheaths. In addition to that, the terrifying force between the two martial trees continued to accumulate, which slowly formed a pattern. What's that? Qin Nan was stunned seeing this. He never knew that it was possible to form a pattern when the martial trees were formed. Buzz, buzz, buzz. A series of vibrating noises could be heard all of a sudden. Qin Nan subconsciously glanced toward it and saw the primary monarch force in his body that was comparable to the 3 monarch horoscopes trembling vigorously as if it had sensed something. What's going on? The evolution of the two martial trees has triggered a reaction from the primary monarch force? Qin Nan's eyes flickered with astonishment. Everyone knew that the primary monarch force was the key to achieving the martial monarch realm. Normally speaking, apart from the monarch ranking and the god ranking, it was impossible for them to react to the power of the monarch ranking and god ranking. Not to mention that there were 2 martial trees. Finally, the patterns on the 2 martial trees were completed. Qin Nan, who was still immersed in astonishment, turned his head around as if he was attracted by some invisible force. He could only see a twisted, pitch-black pattern on the destruction martial tree. Meanwhile, on the other divine battle tree, there was a chaos formed by the battle intent. Bang! At that instant, the 2 martial trees unleashed a terrifying force that surged into the sky. The enormous lake was instantly vaporized, causing it to vanish into thin air. The surroundings were shrouded in darkness. Only the 2 martial trees floating at the bottom of the lake were glowing brightly, as if they were the only source of light in the world. However, it was not over. Bang, bang, bang! Following a series of explosions, giant stormy clouds appeared out of nowhere and rapidly gathered in the sky. Inside the stormy clouds were 4 different kinds of lightning: crimson, orange, blue, and purple, which lit up the entire place with 4 different colors. Under the stormy clouds, the mountains, forests, etc. were extremely tiny. Tribulation. Tribulation? Qin Nan was dumbfounded. The evolution of his 2 martial trees had triggered the tribulation? Even though the tribulation was quite strange, as if it had yet to unleash its full power, why would it appear out of nowhere? Piss off! At that instant, a roar exploded from the 9 heavens. A terrifying, magnificent sword intent that felt like the accumulation of countless ancient battle dragons sprang forward and slashed at the strange tribulation, shattering it into pieces with brute force. The entire sky suddenly became clear and bright, returning to normal without any abnormalities. In just a few breaths' time, they had returned from the apocalyptic hell to the light. Whoosh! A piercing sound could be heard as a glowing figure landed in front of Qin Nan. The glowing figure was different from the others. Its entire body was emitting a sword intent, as if it was formed by the sword intent. In addition to that, it also felt like it was one with the heavens and earth. There was no distinction between one and the other. It was relaxed, and it felt as if it could control the entire world. Buzz! The heaven-shattering saber that had remained silent for a long time suddenly emitted a glow. Even the figure that was as terrifying as the light took a step back when he saw this sharp light. He said somewhat awkwardly, This saber friend, I am not your enemy. Otherwise, I would not have helped him shatter the lightning tribulation earlier. Hearing this, the heaven-shattering saber seemed to ponder for a moment, before its glow slowly dissipated. Since when did such a terrifying saber appear in the Kanglan continent, to be able to intimidate me? The glowing figure stared at the heaven-shattering saber and fell into deep thought. It had completely forgotten its initial intention. Could you be the sword spirit of the 7 luminaries' flying sword? Qin Nan, who was still immersed in astonishment, immediately discovered something after taking a glimpse with his left eye. Oh? Your eye technique is quite impressive, the glowing figure said in astonishment. That's right, I'm the sword spirit. People call me 7 luminaries. What happened just then? How did you trigger the tribulation of the martial monarch realm? Oh wait, with its power, I don't think you can call it the tribulation of the martial monarch realm. It's more like a smaller version. Tribulation of the martial monarch realm. Qin Nan was startled. That's right, the tribulation of the martial monarch realm. A cold voice suddenly appeared. You must be Qin Nan, right? A white-haired young man had appeared out of nowhere in the sky. The white-haired young man was perfectly clean, with sharp brows and bright eyes. He was quite handsome, but his eyes were like darkness, capable of devouring one's mind. Sun and moon, even you were startled. What exactly is going on with this kid? The sword spirit of the 7 luminaries asked. Sun and moon? Are you the sun and moon sword god? Qin Nan's eyes widened. It's just a wisp of my will. The sun and moon sword god said calmly. He turned around and glanced at the 2 martial ancestor trees at the bottom of the lake. Even with his identity and intelligence, his eyes were filled with astonishment as he exclaimed. Who would have thought, apart from her, there's actually someone in this world who could do this? Such a pity, if this happened 15,000 years ago, you would have achieved the martial monarch realm on your own, and become the double martial monarch. According to the legends, you would be the only double martial monarch realm in history. End of chapter. Chapter 1244. That impressive? The 7 luminaries' sword spirit was astounded. It clearly knew what it meant to be called undefeatable before achieving the martial monarch realm. Senior Sun and Moon, why were you able to achieve the martial monarch realm on your own 15,000 years ago? Why are you the only undefeatable dual martial monarch realm in history? Qin Nan asked as he collected his thoughts. He was completely clueless about everything. Why not ask the sun and moon sword god now that he was here? For the cultivators of the Kanglan continent, 15,000 years ago was an extremely important era, but I won't tell you the details. However, I can tell you that 15,000 years ago, cultivators could comprehend the primary monarch force through their own cultivation. The sun and moon sword god said. Comprehend the primary monarch force through their own cultivation? Qin Nan's heart shuddered upon hearing this. Did that mean the monarch ranking and the god ranking were only able to control the primary monarch force after 15,000 years? As for the only undefeatable dual martial monarch realm, it's because of the Tao pattern on your martial trees. Since the birth of the Kanglan continent in the past 30,000 years, apart from you, only one other person has done it. On top of that, you've also surpassed the rules of cultivation, thus making you the undefeatable dual martial monarch realm. The sun and moon sword god said calmly. Tao pattern? Qin Nan fixed his gaze on the 2 patterns between the 2 martial trees. He did not expect the merging of the martial trees would result in such an unexpected change. However, what exactly was the Tao pattern? The sun and moon sword god suddenly raised his hand as if he was aware of Qin Nan's doubts. He flicked his finger in Qin Nan's direction. At that instant, a magnificent sword intent with the color of moonlight slashed in Qin Nan's direction with a terrifying aura, as if it had descended from the 9 heavens. A strong sense of danger exploded in Qin Nan's heart. Destruction Martial Tree. Qin Nan backed off and let out a roar. The Destruction Martial Tree rapidly flew toward him while emitting a pitch-black glow in all directions, as if it had formed a dark space. Boom! A shocking scene took place. The powerful sword intent began to crumble layer by layer under the destruction will and turned into nothing. Such a powerful monarch art, the sword intent is strong enough to kill a first-layer martial monarch. The 7 luminaries' sword spirit smacked its lips and said, "Don't worry." This, Qin Nan's eyes were filled with astonishment. Although he had expected the Destruction Martial Tree to grow stronger after the evolution, he did not expect it to be this powerful. His instinct told him that if he were to fight the Xian Wind Martial Monarch again, he would only need to rely on the Destruction Martial Tree. If the Destruction Martial Tree was already so powerful, how powerful would the other Divine Battle Tree be? What kind of power would the 2 martial trees unleash when they merged? This is the Tao diagram. It's a diagram of the great Tao formed by evolving a martial Tao to the extreme. You've just refined 2 Tao diagrams. Remember to cultivate in seclusion and communicate with them. Otherwise, the Tao diagrams might collapse again. The Sun and Moon Sword God said with a pitiful look. Qin Nan's talent had completely exceeded his imagination. If Qin Nan had successfully achieved the martial monarch realm, his future would be limitless. However, there were no ifs in this world. No matter how outstanding Qin Nan was, it was meaningless to the Anti-Heaven Alliance. I see, Senior Sun and Moon, thanks for your help, and Senior Sword Spirit, thanks for your help. Qin Nan came to a realization and brought his fists together toward the Sun and Moon Sword God and the 7 luminaries Sword Spirit. The Sun and Moon Sword God nodded. His figure shattered into pieces and vanished. The Sun and Moon are always so cold. Don't mind them. Kid, you're not bad. Work hard, I'll look after you. The 7 luminaries Sword Spirit patted Qin Nan on the shoulder and glanced at the heaven-shattering saber. The saber was extremely hostile toward him. He could only wait until he had a good relationship with Qin Nan to earn the saber's favor so that he could study the saber. After the 7 luminaries Sword Spirit left, Qin Nan let out a deep breath and withdrew the 2 martial trees into his body. He sat down with his legs crossed at the bottom of the lake. Who would have thought the 2 martial trees have reached such a level this time? If I were to find the pieces of the Kanglan tree and merge the 2 martial trees into one, what level would the martial trees reach? If I were to inherit the monarch horoscope after merging the 2 martial trees into one? Qin Nan's eyes flickered passionately. He was looking forward to the outcome just by imagining it. Right, send a message to the alliance leader. Qin Nan collected his thoughts and took out the token. He took out the white command medallion and transmitted a divine will. His priority now was to find the pieces of the Kanglan tree. Why isn't there any response? A moment later, Qin Nan frowned slightly. However, right at that moment, a familiar voice sounded in his mind. Qin Nan, the alliance leader isn't in the Anti-Heaven Alliance. I'm here to respond. The voice belonged to the Sun and Moon Sword God. Senior. Qin Nan was startled. You're looking for the pieces of the Kanglan tree. I believe you're trying to merge the 2 martial trees? If that's the case, ordinary pieces of the Kanglan tree won't be able to do it. You'll need a huge piece of the Kanglan tree. Therefore, a badge alone won't be able to fulfill your wish. The Sun and Moon Sword God transmitted his voice. Indeed, now that the 2 martial trees have reached such a level, ordinary pieces of the Kanglan tree won't be able to merge them. If a badge isn't enough, can I use 2 badges to ask the alliance leader to fulfill my wish? Qin Nan asked. 10 days later, activate the 2 badges and I'll look for you. The Sun and Moon Sword God said after a slight hesitation. Qin Nan was startled. Did that mean it would work? Forget it, I'll go into seclusion to stabilize the Tao patterns. I'll understand in 10 days. Qin Nan shook his head and slowly closed his eyes. However, little did Qin Nan know, inside the space of the 7 luminaries' flying sword, on the peak of a snowy mountain, the sun and moon sword god glanced at the snowflakes falling from the sky. A moment later, his lips curled upward. 2 martial trees with Tao patterns, each with different Tao patterns, merging them together. It must be a spectacular sight, right? If it works, even though this Qin Nan is only a martial ancestor, he would most likely be able to defeat a 4th-layer martial monarch. That's quite interesting. I'll lend him a hand, and let the martial serendipity pavilion owe me a favor. Meanwhile, in the Anti-Heaven Palace of the Anti-Heaven Alliance, 2 monarch glows flew into the palace at a shocking pace. The illusionist martial monarch grabbed the glows and said with a hint of joy, "Martial monarch Yuqing and martial monarch Liuha's monarch blood scrolls are here." "Very well, now we only need martial monarch Dongku's monarch blood scroll." The eyes of martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian flickered coldly. End of chapter. Chapter 1245. Time gradually passed. 6 days were gone in the blink of an eye. During this period, Qin Nan was fully focused on comprehending the 2 Tao patterns. So these 2 Tao diagrams have a life of their own. Who would have thought the trunks, branches, leaves, etc. on the 2 martial trees would contain the force of Kanglan and other wills? The Tao pattern of destruction and the Tao pattern of the divine battle god are like a core. The other wills are surrounding them, allowing their strength to reach an unimaginable level. As he comprehended the Tao patterns, Qin Nan came to understand many things, but at the same time, he also had new doubts. Firstly, it was related to the primary monarch force. Qin Nan suddenly had a flash of inspiration while comprehending the Tao patterns. He tried to merge his primary monarch force with the 2 martial trees, but to his surprise, the primary monarch force that was equivalent to 3 monarch horoscopes was unable to merge with the martial trees. Normally, it should be possible to merge with the martial trees. Secondly, inside Qin Nan's body, the aura of the divine battle martial tree was obviously stronger than the destruction martial tree, resulting in the same situation as before. After all, both the destruction will and the will of the divine god of battle had reached such a level. It was highly possible that they were unwilling to merge with one another. The secrets of the monarch horoscopes aren't something that I can comprehend yet. However, the 2 martial trees are definitely a problem, so I'll have to come up with a plan. Qin Nan mumbled to himself as he pondered. However, right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. Dong, dong, dong. A series of thunderous chimes could be heard coming from the distance, as if it was trying to fill the entire space. At that instant, everyone cultivating inside the 7 luminaries' flying sword and the cultivators in the 4 palaces were startled. The chimes, could it be the heavenly bell? Qin Nan opened his eyes, which were filled with astonishment. In the Anti-Heaven Alliance there was a giant bell known as the Sky Bell. Whenever something serious happened, the Sky Bell would be rung. Once it was rung, everyone, including the martial monarchs, elders, deacons, disciples, etc. would have to make their way to the 7 luminaries' flying sword at once. Looks like something big has happened. Forget it, let's go and take a look. Qin Nan thought to himself. He hastily got up and flew away. Not long after, he arrived at the Anti-Heaven Alliance. As he raised his head, he saw the dojo where the Pillar of Courage once stood was now crowded with figures. With a rough glance, there were over 300 of them. Lu Shui, Sun Wu, Wei Ming, and the others were among them. What happened? Why is the heaven bell ringing? I'm not sure either. Could it be that the South Heaven sacred ground is attacking us? Are you kidding me? How could the South Heaven sacred ground discover us? The cultivators at the scene began to whisper among themselves. Many of them even had a hint of panic on their faces. Qin Nan landed in front of the crowd with a kick. As soon as he landed, Lu Shui, Sun Wu, Wei Ming, and the others glanced at him with different looks in their eyes. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. 3 piercing sounds could be heard all of a sudden. Following a magnificent monarch glow and a strong monarch aura, the illusionist martial monarch Rongtian, and martial monarch Mingkong floated above the dojo with imperious expressions. Greetings, hall leader, martial monarch. The elders, deacons, and disciples immediately brought their fists together. Don't tell me these 3 are teaming up against me? Qin Nan frowned slightly as he had a bad feeling about it. Who rung the heaven bell? At that instant, an imperious roar could be heard coming from the sky. Everyone could see a middle-aged man wearing a black robe and a black golden crown on his head. His body was surrounded by a demonic aura as he strode forward. The aura emitted from his body was like a mystical mountain, giving the crowd a strong sense of suppression. Even the illusionist martial monarch and his crew felt tiny before the middle-aged man. The man was none other than martial monarch Guiwu, who had reached the peak martial monarch realm among the 9 martial monarchs of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Senior, I was the one who rung the heaven bell. The illusionist martial monarch immediately went up and brought his fists together respectfully. Why is that? Martial monarch Guiwu raised his eyebrows. Senior and all the elders, deacons, and disciples, listen up. I didn't rung the heaven bell because I'm in danger. I've taken out the 6 monarch blood scrolls to officially impeach Elder Qin Nan of the Anti-Heaven Palace. The illusionist martial monarch yelled. The illusionist martial monarch snapped and flicked his finger, firing an ancient scroll made of beast hide into the air. The ancient scroll slowly opened, revealing 6 drops of monarch blood. Each drop of monarch blood gave off a completely different monarch will. At that instant, martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian, who were standing beside the illusionist martial monarch, suddenly made their moves too. With a flick of their fingers, they fired a monarch glow onto Qin Nan's figure, sealing off Qin Nan's movement. 6 monarch blood scrolls? Martial monarch Guiwu was astounded. 6 monarch blood scrolls? It's really the 6 monarch blood scrolls. It contains the blood of the illusionist martial monarch Rongtian, martial monarch Mingkong, martial monarch Liuhe, martial monarch Yuqing, and martial monarch Dongku. In other words, the 6 martial monarchs are here to impeach Elder Qin Nan. The faces of the elders, deacons, and disciples were filled with astonishment. They had long heard that Qin Nan and the illusionist martial monarch were not on friendly terms. They had also heard that the illusionist martial monarch had tried to pick on Qin Nan several times, but he had always suffered losses in the end. However, they never thought the illusionist martial monarch would come up with such a move. 6 monarch blood scrolls? Qin Nan squinted his eyes upon seeing this. This illusionist martial monarch Rongtian, and martial monarch Mingkong were really going all out just to deal with him. In the Anti-Heaven Alliance, he was one of the 5 great elders of the Anti-Heaven Palace. The illusionist martial monarch, who was the vice-hall leader, had no right to impeach him. Only the hall leader of the Anti-Heaven Palace had the right to do so. However, as the magical hair sword god was not around most of the time, he had set up another rule. As long as the 6 martial monarchs were willing to release their blood and turn it into blood scrolls, they would be able to give out important orders, including impeaching the elders and disciples of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Inform all the martial monarchs, elders, deacons, and disciples that this Qin Nan has disrespected his elders and is disloyal to the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Qin Nan is now officially expelled from the Anti-Heaven Alliance. He is no longer an elder or disciple of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. The illusionist martial monarch yelled. Agreed. Martial monarch Rongtian and martial monarch Mingkong nodded simultaneously. Agreed. Agreed. On the scroll, the blood of martial monarch Lyoha, martial monarch Yuqing, and martial monarch Dongku emitted a monarch glow, which transformed into a magnificent figure that spoke. End of chapter. Chapter 1246. They're really impeached. Qin Nan is done for. The blood letter has been written. The 6 martial monarchs have spoken. The impeachment has taken effect. The elders, deacons, and disciples were astounded. It was their first time witnessing the impeachment of 6 martial monarchs since joining the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Lu Shui and Sun Wu, who were in the crowd, were pleasantly surprised instead. Never had they imagined that their master would actually make such a grand move this time. Qin Nan, that's what you get for being so smug. Let's see how you're going to die. Lu Shui and Sun Wu uttered hollow laughs. Ha ha ha, the impeachment is a success. Let's see if this Qin Nan still has the guts to reject us. The illusionist martial monarch Rongtian, and martial monarch Mingkong exchanged glances with one another and burst out laughing in their hearts. Their faces were brimming with excitement. They had been waiting for this day for far too long. Ridiculous, extremely ridiculous. I don't have any objection to the impeachment of the 6 martial monarchs, but when have I ever been disrespectful, and disloyal to the Anti-Heaven Alliance? And disobedient? Do you really think I should obey you after you've robbed me of the heavenly arcana immortal fruits? Qin Nan was startled seeing this. Before his eyes were filled with great fury. The illusionist martial monarch and his crew were shameless to the extreme. They were still trying to twist the truth and distort the truth. The elders, deacons, and disciples let out sighs in their hearts after hearing this, with complicated expressions on their faces. Actually, they were not stupid. How could they not know the truth behind this? But what could they do? How could they possibly win a duel against the martial monarchs? Enough with the nonsense. From today onward, you're no longer a member of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Get out of my sight. There was no way the illusionist martial monarch would allow Qin Nan to finish his sentence. He stomped the ground and emitted a tremendous monarch glow as he threw a punch in Qin Nan's direction. The space above the dojo began to distort as a destructive aura burst out from it. Normally, even if he was no longer a member of the Anti-Heaven Alliance, they would not kill him. Even if they were to fight, they would only teach him a lesson. However, the illusionist martial monarch was planning to cripple Qin Nan with a terrifying move. And yet, right here, just as he was about to leave, a sudden change occurred. How dare you! Following an imperious roar, a sharp sword intent appeared out of nowhere like a roaring dragon. It shattered the fist intents into pieces within the blink of an eye. Who? The illusionist martial monarch Rongtian, and martial monarch Mingkong were astounded. Martial monarch Guiwu and the crowd were startled, as they did not expect someone to interfere. Once the blood scrolls were completed, the words of the 6 martial monarchs were already in effect. If anyone were to interrupt the process, it would be equivalent to challenging the rules of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Humph! How imperious are you 6, impeaching him just like that? Following a cold harumph, a glowing figure appeared, which turned out to be the Sword Spirit 7 luminaries. However, no one noticed that despite the Sword Spirit 7 luminaries' stern tone, its lips were curled into a grin. If it weren't for the fact that the occasion was inappropriate, it would most likely thank the 3 cultivators for giving it a chance to make Qin Nan owe it a favor. Senior 7 luminaries? The illusionist martial monarch and the others were startled. They did not expect the sword spirit of the 7 luminaries' flying sword would lend Qin Nan a hand. On top of that, at that instant, a voice descended from the 9 heavens. How about we forget about the impeachment? Even though the voice was extremely cold, it served as a shocking explosion in martial monarch Guiwu's ears. Greetings, senior sun and moon sword god. Martial monarch Guewu immediately bowed respectfully without any hint of arrogance. Even though he was a peak martial monarch realm authority, he was nothing compared to the sword god. Senior. Sun and moon sword god? The elders, deacons, and disciples stared with their eyes open wide, their faces filled with astonishment. In addition to them, the illusionist martial monarch Rongtian, martial monarch Mingkong, Lu Shui, and Xin Wu were dumbfounded too, as if a bucket of cold water had been poured onto their hearts. Did the impeachment even involve senior sword god? Besides, apart from the sword spirit's 7 luminaries, even the sun and moon sword god was speaking on Qin Nan's behalf? Sunday. No, senior sun and moon sword god, and senior 7 luminaries, since you've said so, we'll let the impeachment go. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page, forget it. The illusionist martial monarch collected his thoughts and blurted out in a cold sweat. Martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian felt extremely displeased, but they quickly nodded too. Even though they had no idea why the sun and moon sword god would interfere, it was better to let it go. Even if they were given 100 guts, they would not dare to challenge the sun and moon sword god. The elders, deacons, and disciples felt like they were in a dream after witnessing the scene before them. They did not expect such a terrifying situation to be resolved so easily in just a few breaths' time. Disperse. The sun and moon sword god's voice appeared once again. However, before he could finish, a thunderous roar could be heard all of a sudden. Senior sword god, please wait. The one speaking was none other than Qin Nan. At that instant, martial monarch Guewu, the illusionist martial monarch Mingkong, and the crowd were stunned. Their eyes were filled with doubts. The danger had been resolved. What else did this Qin Nan want? Was he going to tell the sun and moon sword god that it was unfair for 6 martial monarchs to impeach him at the same time? It was obvious that the sun and moon sword god knew it was unfair, but what could he do? There was no way the sun and moon sword god would punish 6 martial monarchs for a mere Qin Nan. Speak. The sun and moon sword god's tone remained calm. Senior sword god. Since I've joined the Anti-Heaven Alliance, the illusionist martial monarch has been trying to harm me, but I've managed to stop him. However, when we arrived at the ancient battleground, the illusionist martial monarch exposed my identity and tried to kill me. The illusionist martial monarch even teamed up with martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Mingkong to threaten me twice, asking me to hand over the heavenly arcana immortal fruits without any conditions. Just because I didn't submit to them, they are accusing me of a bunch of ridiculous crimes to impeach me. Qin Nan turned his head and glanced at the illusionist martial monarch Mingkong, and martial monarch Mingkong. His eyes flickered with a shocking glow. I won't accept it. The Anti-Heaven Alliance has a rule that no violence is allowed in the Alliance. But now I hope you can let me challenge them and not rely on anything else but my own strength to get myself a justice. The last 2 words were uttered like thunder. End of chapter. Chapter 1247. At that instant, the entire dojo fell into a dead silence. The eyes of martial monarch Guewu, the deacons, elders, and disciples were filled with astonishment, as if they were doubting whether they had heard it wrong. A mere peak martial ancestor like Qin Nan was challenging a martial monarch? Did he really think he could defeat a martial monarch just because he had surpassed the rules of cultivation? As for the illusionist martial monarch Rongtian, and martial monarch Mingkong, they were dumbfounded too. Even though they had witnessed how Qin Nan had fought the Xianwind martial monarch, the illusionist martial monarch's cultivation had reached the 3rd layer martial monarch realm, which was only a step away from the 4th layer martial monarch realm. The Xianwind martial monarch was no match against him. Even the sun and moon sword god was stunned by Qin Nan's words. A moment later, his voice echoed in the rift. You're allowed to challenge them, but only if the illusionist martial monarch and the others are willing to accept the challenge. Hearing this, Qin Nan glanced at the three martial monarchs. His right arm transformed into the heaven-shattering saber and pointed at the illusionist martial monarch and the others. Illusionist martial monarch Rongtian, martial monarch Minkong, I'm Qin Nan and I challenge you to a duel. You can come at me one at a time, or all three of you at once. I'll take all of you on at once. The words caused the hearts of the crowd to tremble once again. No one had expected this Qin Nan to be so daring to challenge three martial monarchs at once. Was this Qin Nan out of his mind? Ha ha ha, Qin Nan, you've really opened my eyes today. Instead of taking the path to heaven, you insist on coming to hell. Besides, you dare to challenge all three of us? That was simply wishful thinking. I alone am more than enough to deal with you. The illusionist martial monarch burst out laughing. His body emitted a blinding glow as he took a step forward. He arrived in front of Qin Nan like a giant and threw a punch at Qin Nan. Dazzling emperor rays burst out from the tip of the fist, transforming into a total of 10 worlds within the fist, enveloping Qin Nan and using the power of the worlds to crush Qin Nan into pieces. The illusionist martial monarch immediately used his killing move, the illusionist fist. After all, Qin Nan had taken the initiative to seek death. How could he not fulfill his wish? Qin Nan is finished. All the elders, deacons, and younger brothers present when they saw this punch, their faces were filled with absent-mindedness, and their minds were shaken. They could only feel that the punch was capable of shattering the heavens and earth, destroying everything in its path. It was not something that their martial ancestor realm could resist. Martial monarch Minkong and martial monarch Rongtian uttered hollow laughs. They were quite observant, thus they could easily tell that even though Qin Nan would not die from the punch, he would surely be crippled. However, in the nick of time, Qin Nan's figure made his move. Trying to hurt me with a mere punch? Destruction martial tree, destruction of everything. Qin Nan's aura skyrocketed as he waved his hand, summoning the destruction martial tree into the sky. It emitted a boundless black glow, which sprang in the illusionist martial monarch's direction like a black moon. Bang bang bang! A series of deafening explosions took place. The illusionist martial monarch's tremendous fist intent began to shatter under the overwhelming destruction will. The worlds within the fist were shattered one after another. What's going on? Did he grow stronger? The illusionist martial monarch was startled. The grins on martial monarch Minkong and martial monarch Rongtian's faces froze too. Martial monarch Guiwu, the elders, deacons, and disciples felt their hearts exploding upon seeing this. Their faces were filled with disbelief. Qin Nan had managed to shatter the illusionist martial monarch's attack with brute force? No wonder you dare to challenge me, but do you really think you're my match just because your strength has improved slightly? Let me tell you, the difference between a martial monarch and a martial ancestor is like the difference between the heavens and earth. The illusionist martial monarch. The illusionist martial monarch collected his thoughts and performed a hand seal. At that instant, his figure emitted a gray glow that swept into the surroundings, causing the entire place to turn dark, as if they had entered a strange world. Illusionist spear. The illusionist martial monarch let out a roar as a 30-zhang-long spear that seemed to be forged with the blood of countless ancient demons was fired in Qin Nan's direction. Destruction martial tree, Tao of destruction. With a thought, Qin Nan summoned the destruction martial tree once again. However, instead of emitting a black glow, the destruction Tao pattern at its center unleashed an invisible force of destruction, which stood in front of him like a towering tree. In front of Qin Nan's eyes, Li Qia's eyes were filled with a strange light. Trying to stop my attack with just a single martial tree, mm? The illusionist martial monarch let out a hollow laugh, but his smile froze in just a brief moment. Following a loud explosion, the destruction martial tree was knocked back while its glow dimmed. However, the destruction Dao pattern managed to resist the blood-red spear with brute force. Sky desolating saber art slash. With a flicker, Qin Nan arrived before the illusionist martial monarch and unleashed a terrifying saber intent. Crap, force of the illusionist martial monarch, refine my body. The illusionist martial monarch was startled. He did not expect Qin Nan's speed to be so quick too. He immediately performed a hand seal, summoning streams of force of the illusionist martial monarch's figure like swimming dragons, which encapsulated his figure like a gray giant. Even the sky-desolating saber art was unable to break through his defense. Divine Battle Spirit, Divine Battle Tree. Qin Nan unleashed his aura as he unleashed the Divine Battle Spirit, unleashing the aura of the Divine God of Battle. The Divine Battle Tree emitted a blinding blue glow like a peerless godly sword or the illusionary figure of the Divine God of Battle as it lashed at the illusionist martial monarch. Bang! The force of the illusionist martial monarch's figure was instantly shattered. Your two martial trees. The illusionist martial monarch was knocked backward as he finally realized something. His eyes flickered with terror. As a martial monarch, he was quite knowledgeable. Did this Qin Nan merge his martial trees into two? Otherwise, how could he possess such terrifying power? Did you notice? But it's too late. Qin Nan's left eye emitted a blue glow as it peeked through everything. With a kick, his hair drifted wildly as he arrived before the illusionist martial monarch once again and executed a series of terrifying saber arts. The two martial trees behind him followed closely behind him like two peerless experts, unleashing a shocking force. Bang bang bang! At that instant, a series of explosions echoed between the heavens and earth. Martial monarch Guiwu, martial monarch Rongtian, martial monarch Minkong, and the elders, deacons, and disciples were dumbfounded when they saw the ferocious auras and the terrifying battle taking place before them. Qin Nan in the martial ancestor realm. Had he managed to suppress the illusionist martial monarch? End of chapter. Chapter 1248. Resurrection Chain. The illusionist martial monarch let out a furious roar as he took out a rare artifact. A blue chain extended from his body and penetrated the layers of saber intents like a giant dragon, tearing at Qin Nan with a shocking might. Will of Destruction! With a thought, the destruction martial tree on Qin Nan's left unleashed wisps of destruction will that encapsulated the chains, causing them to tremble vigorously. Following it, the heaven-shattering saber slashed forward. The terrifying saber glow shattered the chains into pieces with brute force. Damn it, how is this possible? What kind of saber is that? The illusionist martial monarch wore a twisted expression upon seeing this. His heart turned cold too. As the battle continued, he realized that Qin Nan was not only terrifying because of his two martial trees, but also his martial spirit, the saber in his hand and his eye technique. The combination of all of them had rendered all of his rare artifacts and secret techniques useless. Martial Monarch Rongtian, Martial Monarch Minkong, what are you waiting for? Attack together! In the nick of time, the illusionist martial monarch made up his mind and uttered a roar. Even though it was embarrassing for them to interfere, it was better than losing the battle if they continued to fight. Heaven and Earth Fusion Flame. Space Storm. Martial Monarch Minkong and Martial Monarch Mingtian, who were still in a daze, immediately collected their thoughts after hearing the roar. They unleashed powerful monarch auras and monarch glows as they stepped forward and executed two powerful attacks. Qin Nan's strength was too terrifying, to the point that they were utterly terrified. Therefore, not only were they planning to attack together, they were also planning to use the opportunity to cripple Qin Nan. the three martial monarchs, are attacking at the same time. The elders, deacons, and disciples raised their heads and stared at the terrifying battle taking place in the sky. Their faces were filled with great astonishment. Even martial monarch Guiwu was no exception. They had never seen a martial ancestor fighting against third-layer martial monarchs, and even forcing three martial monarchs to attack at the same time. In the sky, Qin Nan, who was suppressing the illusionist martial monarch, immediately activated the golden seal when he was aware of the attacks from the two martial monarchs. A golden glow encapsulated his figure as he raised his left arm. Rumble! Facing the two martial monarch realm attacks, Qin Nan's figure was devoured by the magnificent flames and the overwhelming force, which sent him flying into the distance at a rapid pace. The illusionist martial monarch, who was initially in agony, was relieved. Martial monarch Minkong, martial monarch, listen to me. The illusionist martial monarch immediately transmitted his voice and prepared to execute an ancient formation to eliminate Qin Nan in one fell swoop. However, at that instant, a terrifying saber glow slashed in the illusionist martial monarch's direction. The illusionist martial monarch was startled as he immediately backed away while performing a hand seal to execute a defensive monarch art, summoning the illusionist demon god to protect himself. In addition to that, Qin Nan's figure sprang forward once again as the two martial trees charged at the illusionist martial monarch in a shocking manner. Crap! The illusionist martial monarch was startled as he performed another hand seal. Octopole serene flame, melt the heavens and earth. I'm the leader of all creations, the boundless rift is at my disposal. Martial monarch Minkong and martial monarch Minkong were startled too, as they did not expect Qin Nan to counterattack so soon. They immediately executed their movement monarch arts and executed a series of terrifying monarch arts that encapsulated Qin Nan's figure like a great storm. Qin Nan activated his left eye and executed the unstoppable step. He activated the golden seal to dodge the attacks while his figure continued to fly toward the illusionist martial monarch. Again, the illusionist martial monarch's eyes widened. Illusionist martial monarch, do you still remember the trouble you gave me when we first joined the alliance? This punch is my return to you. Qin Nan uttered a thunderous roar as the will of destruction and the will of the divine god of battle circled his fist before he threw a punch at the illusionist martial monarch's figure. Following a blast, the illusionist martial monarch, who was being suppressed by the two martial trees, was knocked back by the punch, causing the blood in his body to surge vigorously. Damn it, he's targeting the illusionist martial monarch. Martial monarch Minkong and martial monarch Rongtian were startled. They exchanged glances with one another and unleashed their trump cards, summoning cages of the heavens and earth, fiery rifts, and all kinds of rare artifacts to unleash their powers. However, it was as if Qin Nan only had the illusionist martial monarch in his eyes. Even when he could not dodge the monarch arts, he still activated the golden seal to resist them. He was only trying to free himself up so he could charge at the illusionist martial monarch. Do you still remember how you set me up when we were drinking? This punch is my return to you. Do you still remember how you threatened me at the star-aligning palace? This slash. You exposed me at the ancient battleground. Amidst the explosions, Qin Nan's roars could be heard continuously. Each time, he would throw a terrifying punch or a terrifying saber intent at the illusionist martial monarch. Even when he was being flanked by martial monarch Minkong and martial monarch Rongtian, even when his body was covered in wounds and was bleeding profusely, he continued to charge at the illusionist martial monarch like a phantom with a tremendous battle intent. As for the illusionist martial monarch, his body was covered in wounds from Qin Nan's ferocious attacks, causing golden blood to flow out from his wounds. His hair was disheveled, and he was in a miserable state, completely losing his previous imperious attitude. As a matter of fact, His gaze toward Qin Nan was filled with a hint of fear. This Qin Nan was too crazy. He was willing to go all out just to defeat him. This martial monarch Guiwu, the elders, deacons, and disciples were lost in their thoughts. Even their souls were struck by a great impact. The reason being that both Qin Nan's appearance and aura were like that of an undefeatable divine god of battle. Bang! Martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Mingtian continued to attack. Even with the protection of the golden seal, Qin Nan's figure was still sent flying. However, in the midst of the impact, Qin Nan's figure suddenly leapt into the air and landed above the illusionist martial monarch. Under the latter's terrified gaze, Qin Nan unleashed his might and fired countless punches at the illusionist martial monarch. Bang! The illusionist martial monarch let out a cry of agony as he was sent flying like an arrow being fired. He slammed into the ground in the distance, resulting in a huge pit. Ha ha, how satisfying! Upon seeing this, Qin Nan burst out laughing while his hair danced wildly. Even though he was covered in blood, his aura grew even more shocking. Setting him up? Threatening him? Picking on him? 6 martial monarchs teaming up to impeach him? And now, he had used his own strength to seek justice. End of chapter. Chapter 1249. It's your turn now. Qin Nan raised his head and glanced at martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian in the sky. He stomped his foot and unleashed 2 shocking intents from his 2 martial trees. His figure sprang into the sky like an ancient golden-winged giant ping. Cough cough. Qin Nan, how dare you hurt me? I'll never forgive you. The illusionist martial monarch spat out a few mouthfuls of golden blood from his mouth as he rose to his feet. His eyes were filled with boundless murderous intent as he executed a hand seal once again, unleashing wisps of illusionary force. Even though he was severely injured, he still had the strength to fight. Bang bang! A series of shocking explosions took place one after another, which echoed across the entire space. This time, Qin Nan was no longer teaming up with the illusionist martial monarch. He was fighting 3 martial monarchs on his own. However, this time, Qin Nan was completely suppressed. After all, the strength of the 3 martial monarchs teaming up was utterly terrifying. Besides, martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian were the disciples of the magical hair sword god, thus their strength greatly surpassed that of an ordinary first-layer martial monarch. Even with Qin Nan's 2 martial trees and his other capabilities, he was still suppressed. However, what difference did it make? Even though Qin Nan's injuries were getting worse, causing him to bleed even more, his aura continued to grow stronger. His battle intent continued to surge, which almost turned into an ocean of battle intent. Even the 3 martial monarchs would only suffer more injuries when facing Qin Nan. The battle continued without stopping. Meanwhile, the rift in the surroundings continued to shatter while the dojo trembled vigorously. In the distance, the hundreds of palaces floating in the sky where the elders and disciples were staying were covered in cracks and on the verge of collapsing. Even the weapon spirits of the Anti-Heaven Palace, the Dark Shadow Palace, the Mystic Treasure Palace, and the Star Aligning Palace were startled. They immediately unleashed their mystical glow to resist the impact. The scene was absolutely magnificent. The battle was like a raging tide, a storm, an army crashing into one another, or a few deities destroying the heavens and earth. Enough! Suddenly, at that instant, an imperious roar exploded as a terrifying sword glow descended rapidly from the sky, causing the entire place to be covered in a snow-white color. This strand of sword chi was sufficient to obliterate everything. Qin Nan, the illusionist martial monarch, and the others were startled. They immediately backed off with a kick. This terrifying sword chi also dissipated along with it. The challenge ends here. After this, you are not allowed to retaliate against each other. The Sun and Moon Sword God calmly said. Is this the end? Qin Nan frowned slightly, but soon relaxed. It went without saying that the Sun and Moon Sword God would not allow them to fight to the death in the Anti-Heaven Alliance's territory. It was reasonable for him to intervene. Qin Nan turned around and glanced at the three martial monarchs who were covered in blood. His lips curled upward. Even though it was a pity that he could not continue the battle, he felt extremely satisfied as he had finally vented his anger. Qin Nan, consider yourself lucky this time if you were to continue. Humph! The illusionist Martial Monarch Rongtian, and Martial Monarch Minkong glared at Qin Nan. They were about to say, if you were to continue the battle you would surely die, but when they saw the shocking battle intent bursting out from Qin Nan's eyes, their faces turned pale as their hearts turned cold. They did not dare to say anything further, but harumphed coldly instead. Let's go. The illusionist Martial Monarch and the others exchanged glances with one another. Their expressions changed rapidly as they clenched their teeth and clenched their fists, before releasing them helplessly and flying into the distance. Either way, they had lost the battle, and it was a complete loss. They would only be humiliating themselves if they continued to stay here. Qin Nan, your strength is extraordinary. According to the rules of the Anti-Heaven Alliance, I will now appoint you as the third vice-leader of the Anti-Heaven Palace. The Sun and Moon Sword God said. Thank you, Senior. Qin Nan brought his fists together and said, come with me. Following the words, a stream of sword intent descended from the sky and encapsulated Qin Nan's figure, causing him to vanish into thin air. Martial Monarch Guiwu, the elders, deacons, and disciples could not believe what they had just seen. They did not expect such a terrifying battle to come to an end all of a sudden. Only after a long while did they come back to their senses. Impressive, very impressive. Who would have thought our Anti-Heaven Alliance would have such a formidable person? Even Martial Monarch Guiwu, who had achieved the peak Martial Monarch realm, exclaimed with astonishment in his eyes. What had astonished him was not Qin Nan's outstanding performance. It was the power of thought, but Qin Nan's will, aura, and the usage of monarch arts that he had displayed during the battle, which had reached the pinnacle. This kid's martial talent must be extraordinary. If I have the chance, I should discuss it with him. Martial Monarch Guiwu mumbled to himself as his figure disappeared with a flicker. How terrifying! Facing three martial monarchs head-on. Who in the entire Kanglan continent could do that? Gasped this Qin Nan, such a terrifying strength. Who would have thought the martial ancestor realm is capable of unleashing such a terrifying strength? Justice. Qin Nan has really gotten justice for himself. Not only that, he's now the Vice Hall leader. The elders, deacons, and disciples could not help but burst out in a great uproar, filled with excitement, astonishment, and astonishment. Only Lu Shui and Sun Wu felt like they had fallen into an ice cellar. Their faces were filled with terror. They were Qin Nan's enemies. That being said, there was one more thing that was worth mentioning. After the battle, Qin Nan's name was spread to the ears of the elders, disciples, martial monarchs, and even the martial gods. After the battle, everyone's view of Qin Nan had changed. They now treated Qin Nan as an authority. Some time later, inside the space of the seven luminaries' flying sword, on a huge snowy mountain, the Sun and Moon Sword God sat with his legs crossed. His eyes flickered as he glanced at Qin Nan not far away. He did not expect Qin Nan to be able to unleash such a powerful strength in the battle. He could not help but admit that Qin Nan had given him a great surprise. Kid, you're quite hot-tempered. Don't you know how to be patient? Once you merge with the martial tree, wouldn't it be a piece of cake for you to deal with them? The Sun and Moon Sword God asked. Senior, even the Buddhas have to fight for the time it takes to burn an incense stick, let alone me. I can't stand it anymore. Qin Nan shook his head. However, the movement triggered the injuries on his body, causing him to inhale deeply from the pain. He had completely forgotten about his surroundings during the battle. Now that his battle intent had dissipated, he finally realized how serious the injuries he had suffered were. The Sun and Moon Sword God wore a grin when he heard this. He realized that Qin Nan's personality was exactly the same as his in the past. There's a snow fate pond there. Go treat your injuries there. We'll depart once you've recovered. End of chapter. Chapter 1250. Oh, Senior, I'll be going to treat my injuries first. Qin Nan's eyes flickered when he heard there was a place to treat his injuries. He brought his fists together toward the Sun and Moon Sword God without hesitation and flew toward the Fate Snow Pond behind him. Although the Fate Snow Pond was not huge, it contained a strong force of the Fate Snow Pond, allowing the wounds on Qin Nan's body, his damaged meridians, and the remaining monarch art intents to slowly recover and dissipate. In addition to that, the Tao patterns on the two martial trees in Qin Nan's body also emitted streams of destruction will and divine battle will that flowed through Qin Nan's body to accelerate his recovery. Time gradually passed. On the morning of the 6th day, Qin Nan's eyes finally sprang open. The injuries in his body had completely recovered. Such serious injuries, yet he's already recovered. It seems like the legendary Tao patterns are indeed fascinating. The Sun and Moon Sword God, who had been sitting not far away, nodded slightly when he saw this scene. He continued to speak. Since you have recovered, then go to the Stargaze Palace and take the mission of the wretched disaster forest. Then, my avatar will accompany you. What? Qin Nan was startled hearing this. What surprised him was not the wretched disaster forest, but the words "go with you." The Sun and Moon Sword God was a martial god realm expert, one of the strongest cultivators in the Kanglan continent. Even a clone of his would be extremely terrifying. Qin Nan initially thought the Sun and Moon Sword God would only tell him the location of the pieces of the Kanglan tree so he could look for them himself. Don't be surprised, the wretched disaster forest is one of the 6 great forbidden grounds. Even though it has declined, even martial monarchs would not dare to venture any deeper. If you were to go alone, you would surely die. As for why I didn't retrieve it for you, it's because I only know the rough location. As for the exact location, it will depend on your capabilities. The Sun and Moon Sword God said calmly. I see, I'll leave it to Senior then. Qin Nan reacted and couldn't help but feel happy. He was not afraid of the dangers and difficulties in the wretched disaster forest, but with the Sun and Moon Sword God's help, he would be able to save a lot of trouble. At the same time, he would be able to save a lot of time, allowing him to retrieve the pieces of the Kanglan tree earlier. As such, the day when he would achieve the martial monarch realm was extremely close. These 10 million contribution points were completely worth it, Qin Nan murmured in his heart. He proceeded to the star-aligning palace and accepted the quest of the wretched disaster forest. Together with the Sun and Moon Sword God, he left the Anti-Heaven Alliance and embarked on the journey of searching for the pieces of the Kanglan tree. After Qin Nan left, inside the Anti-Heaven Palace of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Master, Seniors, we've just received news that Qin Nan has accepted the wretched disaster forest mission. He has already left the Anti-Heaven Palace and is most likely heading to the wretched disaster forest. Lu Shui stepped forward and said respectfully, "Going to the wretched disaster forest? This guy's guts aren't small." The illusionist martial monarch said with a dark expression. Illusionist, in my opinion, why don't we set out right away and team up with the other martial monarchs to set up a shocking trap and eliminate Qin Nan once and for all? Even if Master finds out, what's done is done, I believe he will only give us a light punishment. Martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian exchanged glances with one another and said in a cold voice with murderous intent. Since the last battle, not only were they severely injured, It took them a great effort to recover, but their reputation had also suffered a great decline. Besides, whenever they thought about how they, martial monarchs, were defeated by a mere Qin Nan, they would feel extremely humiliated. Even though the sun and moon sword god had reminded them not to seek revenge, how could they possibly let it go after such a deep grudge? As such, the three of them had been looking for a chance to eliminate Qin Nan once and for all. That's a bit too extreme, it won't work. The illusionist martial monarch shook his head. His eyes flickered as a sudden thought crossed his mind. We almost forgot something. We're not the only ones who want Qin Nan's life. You're saying that? Martial monarch Minkong and martial monarch Rongtian were startled. That's right, we'll send someone to inform the Thunder Rock monarch beast and the rest of the martial monarchs that Qin Nan is on his way to the wretched disaster forest. Besides, Qin Nan has acquired a great fortunate encounter in the heavenly arcana, allowing his cultivation to skyrocket. Especially the Xian Wind martial monarch and the others. In addition to that, we'll also confirm our current location and tell them the route that Qin Nan is taking to the wretched disaster forest. The illusionist martial monarch said. Brilliant, brilliant, this is brilliant. There's no need for us to do anything, someone else can kill Qin Nan. Martial monarch Minkong and martial monarch Rongtian's eyes flickered. This time, Qin Nan is going to die for sure. Otherwise, from today onward, my monarch title won't be called illusionist anymore. The illusionist martial monarch let out a sinister laugh. However, Qin Nan was clueless about it. After Qin Nan and the sun and moon sword god left the anti-heaven alliance, they headed to the wretched disaster forest according to the map. Along the way, the sun and moon sword god remained silent. He did not increase his speed either, maintaining the same speed as Qin Nan. Qin Nan was glad to see it. He continued to comprehend the two Tao patterns in his body along the way. The profundities of Tao diagrams were boundless. He had only just touched the threshold now. Time gradually passed. A day was gone fairly quickly. While Qin Nan was on his way, in the Kanglan continent, the northernmost area of the half-god region, in a mystical place, a terrifying existence suddenly opened his eyes, which emitted a shocking glow. Qin Nan has acquired some powerful treasure in the heavenly arcana. His strength has skyrocketed, allowing him to face a third-layer martial monarch now? He's heading to the wretched disaster forest now? The terrifying existence was stunned for a moment, before his eyes flickered. Even though I'm not sure if the information is true, I might as well take a look. First brother, third brother, fourth brother, I've got something important that I need your help with. The terrifying existence took out a badge and transmitted a message. Meanwhile, in the South Heaven sacred ground in the extreme disaster ground, inside an ancient and majestic hall, Qin Nan is heading to the wretched disaster forest? One of the figures revealed a look of joy in his eyes. TSK. His strength is strong enough to face a third-layer martial monarch? No wonder he dares to go to the wretched disaster forest alone. However, this time, you're dead for sure. A shocking murderous aura burst out of the figure as a sudden thought crossed his mind. In addition to that, the news was spread to the other ancient tribes and factions. Almost every martial monarch who was present at the scene, apart from the people of the Lost Herb Garden. Some of the authorities ignored the news, while others gave up after pondering for a while. However, many of them immediately made their move. A formless storm had already been set off. End of chapter. Chapter 1251. Among the three figures, apart from one whose cultivation was only at the second-layer martial monarch realm, the other two were third-layer martial monarchs. You're... Qin Nan was slightly startled. Ha, Qin Nan, what a coincidence to stumble into you here. Among the three figures, the person leading the group let out a loud laugh. He was none other than the martial monarch of the dead spirit tribe, who had suggested Qin Nan to hand over the 85 heavenly arcana immortal fruits at the ancient battleground. It seems like the news was not a lie after all. It seems like my effort to come to this mountain range in advance and wait for you to show up. The martial monarch of the dead spirit tribe murmured with a hint of joy in his eyes. Qin Nan, I won't waste my time with you. Hand over the 85 heavenly arcana immortal fruits and everything you've found in the heavenly arcana, and I'll spare your life. Otherwise, both of you will die here today. The martial monarch of the dead spirit tribe calmed his thoughts and glanced at Qin Nan with a hollow laugh. The other two martial monarchs laughed coldly too. Their intentions were clear. As for the sun and moon sword god beside Qin Nan, the three martial monarchs completely ignored him. The main reason was that the clone of the sun and moon sword god had concealed his aura. He only looked like an ordinary peak martial ancestor. The sun and moon sword god did not speak. He only glanced at Qin Nan. Cough cough, seniors, I've sold the heavenly arcana immortal fruits, and I didn't find any treasure in the heavenly arcana. You should leave and pretend that nothing happened. Qin Nan coughed and said with his lips twitching. He did not expect to stumble into the three martial monarchs so coincidentally. Most importantly, the martial monarch of the dead spirit tribe could have threatened him at any time, but why did he have to do so now? He had the sun and moon sword god standing beside him. Sold? Didn't find any treasure? Hee, do you think I'm a 3-year-old kid? I think you won't give up until all hope is gone. Let's attack together now, kill this kid, and divide the treasures equally. The martial monarch of the dead spirit tribe wore a dark expression as he yelled. All right. The other two martial monarchs responded simultaneously. In a flash the three martial monarchs began to make their move. They executed a series of ancient monarch arts and the martial arts of the dead spirit tribe, causing the surroundings to fall into darkness. Countless phantoms were summoned, as if the place had turned into hell. Upon seeing this, Qin Nan's eyes flickered with pity. What's with that look? Could it be that he was pitying us? How preposterous! To their surprise, Qin Nan's gaze caused the three martial monarchs to become even more infuriated. The monarch arts they executed became even more terrifying. However, at that instant, the sun and moon sword god who had remained silent suddenly made his move. He flicked his finger. Bang! A terrifying sword intent burst forward like a godly dragon emerging from the ocean with a roar. The hell-like heavens and earth were instantly torn in half. The remaining sword intent locked onto the three martial monarchs and slashed at their heads. What? The three martial monarchs were astounded, as a great sense of danger rose in their hearts. Without hesitation, they let out a roar and executed their strongest life-saving monarch arts. Bang bang bang! Following a series of shocking explosions, 3 cries of agony could be heard. The 3 imperious martial monarchs were sent flying, their bodies covered in blood, resulting in a miserable sight. You! The 3 martial monarchs stared at the sun and moon sword god with great fear in their eyes. A single slash had injured 3 of them. How could a peak martial ancestor possibly do that? Even a 7th-layer Emperor Wu would not be able to do that. Go back and tell the patriarch of your dead spirit tribe that he owes the sun and moon a favor. Remember to pay it back next time. The sun and moon sword god said calmly, before he continued to fly forward. Qin Nan shook his head and shrugged his shoulders, before he followed behind him. Tell the patriarch? Owe the sun and moon a favor? Could he be? The 3 martial monarchs were startled, before their faces turned pale as a sudden thought crossed their mind. Which authority in the world had the words sun and moon in their names? Only the sun and moon sword god of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. No wonder Qin Nan was trying to persuade them. No wonder Qin Nan was looking at them with pity. The 3 martial monarchs were trying to rob a martial god. End of chapter. Chapter 1252. The cultivators who were fighting in the woods and the beasts were astounded. They immediately backed away or prostrated themselves on the ground, trembling in fear. The atmosphere between the heavens and earth became stern all of a sudden. Thunder Rock Monarch Beast? Qin Nan's eyes flickered with astonishment when he saw the people before him. He had stumbled into the martial monarch of the Dead Spirit tribe and his crew at noon, and now he had stumbled into the Thunder Rock Monarch Beast and his crew. What was going on? Was it just a coincidence? Ha ha ha, Qin Nan, I bet you didn't expect this, did you? The Thunder Rock Monarch Beast let out a deafening laugh. His eyes were filled with disdain. Previously at the ancient battleground, I gave you a chance, but you didn't take it. Instead, you rejected my offer and asked me to piss off. You kept going against me. I would like to see if you can still be as stubborn as last time. Let's attack together. The Thunder Rock Monarch Beast's expression became twisted. Not only was he going to claim the treasure, he was going to torture Qin Nan and let Qin Nan know the consequences of offending him. Bang! 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 At that instant, the figures of the Thunder Rock Monarch Beast and his crew began to transform into giant golden rocks over a few hundred zhang long. Their wings, which were like peerless godly sabers, were encapsulated by countless thunderous glows, shrouding the heavens and earth, resulting in an imperious sight. Roar! The four thunderous golden rocks uttered a roar into the sky and flapped their wings, stirring up gusts of wind as they arrived above Qin Nan and the martial monarch beast at a shocking pace. Their claws swung downward with a terrifying gust, which felt like four ancient mountains crushing down on two mere ants. The four martial monarchs were well aware of Qin Nan's outstanding strength, thus they would not underestimate him. As such, they immediately made their moves to defeat Qin Nan with a single blow. 10 million contribution points, that's not enough. You'll have to add another 5 million contribution points. In the nick of time, the Sun and Moon Sword God turned around and glanced at Qin Nan and said calmly, "Ahem, Senior, I can do this myself." Qin Nan was a little embarrassed. He was now certain that someone must have done something behind the scenes. Otherwise, it would not be so strange as to continuously bump into them on the road. There were two groups of great emperors who were hostile to him. It will be a waste of time. The Sun and Moon Sword God blurted out as his figure suddenly moved. At that instant, a blinding sword glow burst out from the figure of the Sun and Moon Sword God, illuminating the darkness in the surroundings. The cultivators and beasts in the woods below felt like an ancient sun had appeared out of nowhere, causing their eyes to hurt. 8 Desolation, one sword seals the heavens. The Sun and Moon Sword God reached out his hand and flicked his finger, firing a terrifying sword intent in the direction of the four beasts. This is the Thunder Rock Monarch Beast and his crew held their breaths. At that instant, not only did they sense a great danger, they also realized that the sword intent contained a terrifying sealing force, preventing them from moving. Bang! The terrifying sword chi landed squarely on the bodies of the four beasts. The four beasts cried out in agony. Their bodies that were sturdier than monarch weapons were instantly covered in wounds, causing blood to splatter everywhere. How is this possible? The Thunder Rock Monarch Beast and the other 3 monarch beasts completely lost their previous scornful attitude. Their eyes were filled with great astonishment. They did not expect the old man beside Qin Nan to be such a terrifying existence. That old man from your god-beast forbidden ground has been disobedient lately. It seems like he has forgotten the ambition of your beast tribe, and has decided to submit to the South Heaven sacred ground? Haha, you are truly a disgrace to your ancestors. Die. The Sun and Moon Sword God's deep eyes flickered coldly. Crap. Blood beast forbidden art, 10,000ly shadowless. The Thunder Rock Monarch Beast and his crew were startled. At that instant they sensed a strong sense of danger. Without any hesitation, they immediately executed an ancient secret art that was extremely harmful to them. At that instant, the figures of the four monarch beasts were engulfed in crimson flames, which encapsulated their figures before they disappeared into thin air. Trying to run away? The sun and moon sword god calmly reached out his hand and grabbed forward. Wisps of formidable sword intents appeared between the heavens and earth, forming a giant hand with a sword intent looming over the place. End of chapter. Chapter 1253. Origin of Chi, true form of the god beast. The roar of the thunder rock monarch beast could be heard from the rift ahead. Following this, four tremendous crimson rays appeared out of nowhere and merged into an ancient, imperious figure. The terrifying beastly aura from the figure almost froze the time and space, preventing the giant hand of sword intent from descending upon it. In addition to that, the Thunder Rock monarch beast and his crew seemed to be strengthened by some invisible force, allowing their speed to skyrocket. Even with Qin Nan's left eye of the divine god of battle, he could only catch four blurry figures. It seems like it's going to take some time. The sun and moon sword god's expression remained the same as he performed a hand seal. However, at that instant the sun and moon sword god seemed to be aware of something. His face flickered with surprise as he glanced at Qin Nan and said, "Why is someone trying to kill you?" "Someone else is trying to kill me?" Qin Nan repeated with a startled expression. Bang! At that instant, the rift in front of him suddenly exploded. An ancient glow burst out from the gap and landed on Qin Nan's figure as if it had a mind of its own. Ha ha ha, as expected, our efforts have paid off. Qin Nan, oh Qin Nan, we've finally found you. A burst of thunderous laughter echoed in the rift ahead. Following it, the Xian Wind martial monarch and the other martial monarch of the South Heaven sacred ground stepped out from the rift with formidable monarch auras. Their gazes were locked onto Qin Nan's figure with excitement on their faces. On top of that, the Xian Wind martial monarch was holding an ancient mirror embedded with a red jade. The ancient mirror was an atavistic rare artifact that was specifically used to search for people. The godly ray that landed on Qin Nan had come from the mirror. "It's you guys." Qin Nan collected his thoughts and wore a dark expression. He was now certain that the illusionist martial monarch and his crew had leaked his whereabouts to the others. Otherwise, how would they be able to find him? It seems like the lesson I gave them last time wasn't that big of a deal. Qin Nan clenched his fists tightly as a murderous aura burst out from his body. People of the South Heaven's sacred ground? The sun and moon sword god stopped his hand seal and stopped chasing after the four martial monarchs. An extremely cold light appeared in the Shifter Emperor's deep eyes for the first time. The Xian Wind martial monarch immediately misunderstood Qin Nan's murderous aura. As he assumed Qin Nan was going to attack him, he immediately burst out laughing. "Ha ha ha, Qin Nan, do you think we don't know that you're cultivation?" To the martial monarch? "Martial monarch, we're not the only martial monarch of the heavens, martial monarch of martial monarchs." Following this, the Xian Wind martial monarch waved his hand, summoning an ancient, crimson altar over 20 zhang tall. Under the influence of his monarch force, the ancient formations and runes on the altar were activated rapidly. It felt like some kind of ferocious beast was being awakened deep inside the altar. A teleportation formation? Qin Nan scanned the altar with his left eye and immediately discovered its secrets. The Crimson Altar was a unique teleportation formation, allowing people to teleport here from afar. Bang! A brilliant glow burst out from the altar and soared into the sky, forming an ancient door made of a godly glow. Thud! 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 A series of thuds that sounded like ancient giants stomping on the ground could be heard, as a giant blue figure with two horns and pitch-black eyes stepped out from the door. His figure was emitting a mystical aura. Although he was not a martial monarch, his cultivation was equivalent to the fifth-layer martial monarch realm. Could that be the South Heaven Supreme Emperor? Qin Nan stared at the figure. After joining the Anti-Heaven Alliance, he had learned a few things. The South Heaven Gate had a group of people that specialized in killing enemies in the same realm. They were the South Heaven Spirit Envoys, the South Heaven Supreme Emperor, and the South Heaven Supreme Emperor. The South Heaven Spirit Envoys would be dispatched to deal with enemies in the Martial Ancestor realm. The South Heaven Supreme Emperor would be dispatched to deal with first layer to fifth layer martial monarchs, while the South Heaven Supreme Emperor would be dispatched to deal with fifth layer to peak martial monarchs. It was Qin Nan's first time seeing the South Heaven Supreme Emperor in person. You're a 3-starred enemy of the South Heaven Gate, with an outstanding strength. It's normal for them to send a South Heaven Supreme Emperor to deal with you. The Sun and Moon Sword God calmly said. The illusionary figure of an ancient sword was forming in his hand. He had never drawn out his sword when facing the martial monarch of the Dead Spirit tribe, the 4 monarch beasts, and the others. Now, he was planning to draw out his sword. At that instant, an unexpected occurrence took place. Thud, thud, thud. A series of thunderous footsteps could be heard once again. From then on, from the ancient altar, another 2 giant South Heaven Supreme Emperors with pitch-black eyes stepped out, each emitting a shocking murderous intent. There was not only 1 South Heaven Supreme Emperor, but 3 of them. 3 South Heaven Supreme Emperors? Qin Nan, how badly do they want to kill you, that they would send 3 of them? The Sun and Moon Sword God glanced at Qin Nan with a strange expression. Qin Nan felt a little embarrassed hearing the words. After all, he was the reason why they were in so much trouble. So be it. Even though this is only my clone, it won't be a problem to deal with them. The Sun and Moon Sword God paused for a moment before adding, however, you have to promise me that no one will try to kill you anymore. The Sun and Moon Sword God was in a great mood as he could go on a killing spree again. He even joked with Qin Nan for the first time. He did not believe that anyone would still want to trouble Qin Nan. After all, they had already encountered 7 martial monarchs. It was unlikely that any martial monarch would be targeting Qin Nan, right? Besides, the South Heaven Sacred Ground had already sent 3 Supreme Emperors and 2 martial monarchs. It was unlikely that they would send anyone else. That won't happen. Qin Nan shook his head and said. However, at that instant, an unexpected change took place. A magnificent monarch aura burst out from the godly door. The monarch aura was stronger and more terrifying than the 3 South Heaven Supreme Emperors. An old man with a stern expression stepped out from the door. His figure was encapsulated by a strong sword intent. Greetings, Supreme Elder. The Xian Wind Martial Monarch and the other Martial Monarch, who had been controlling the altar, immediately brought their fists together. Nan. Martial Monarch Nan Jian? Qin Nan was stunned seeing this. The old man was none other than Martial Monarch Nan Jian, who had attacked him at the Dragon Emperor Court. If it weren't for the Martial Serendipity Pavilion, Qin Nan would most likely have died in his hands. However, to Qin Nan's surprise, he was here too. You! The Sun and Moon Sword God almost burst out laughing upon seeing this. He was only joking casually, but a martial monarch Nanjian who was even stronger than the South Heaven Supreme Emperors had actually shown up. This asshole, how many people were trying to kill him? End of chapter. Chapter 1254. Who am I? The Sun and Moon Sword God's lips curled upward as he took a step forward. At that instant, his aura changed tremendously. A magnificent glow of the sun and the moon burst out from his body, lighting up the entire night sky. In the vast forest below, it was as if countless storms were blowing. All the trees and flowers began to sway crazily. A moment ago, he was only an old man with a cultivation of the peak martial ancestor realm. Now, he was an immeasurable middle-aged man with a terrifying aura. This was the true appearance of the sun and moon sword god's clone. You're the sun and moon sword god? How is this possible? Martial monarch Nanjian and the 3 South Heaven's supreme emperors took 3 steps backward as if they had been struck by lightning. Their eyes were filled with terror. What? Sun and moon. Sun and moon sword. Sword god? The Xian Wind martial monarch and the other martial monarch were astounded. Their faces were filled with terror. They never thought a mere Qin Nan would have the sun and moon sword god by his side. Why not? It's been a while since I've killed the scum of the South Heaven sacred ground. Let's have some fun today. The sun and moon sword god said calmly. He waved his hand and unleashed wisps of formidable sword intents. Each of the sword intents penetrated the rift and surrounded the area within 500 zhang in the blink of an eye. Crap! Martial monarch Nanjian was startled. The entire rift had been sealed off. Many of the forbidden techniques used to escape were of no use at all. He's only a clone. We still have a chance if we attack together. Martial monarch Nanjian was a 7th-layer martial monarch after all. He immediately reacted and let out a roar. South Heaven raging waves. The 3 South Heaven supreme emperors immediately made their move. 3 illusionary figures of blue oceans rose into the sky like 3 giant beasts with their mouths wide open. Kill! The Xian Wind martial monarch and the other martial monarch clenched their teeth and executed their powerful monarch arts. Not bad, you're worthy enough for me to use the sheath of that sword. The sun and moon sword god's eyes were calm as he grabbed with his hand. An ancient-looking scabbard appeared in his hand out of nowhere. Following it, he kicked the ground and charged forward like an ancient godly dragon emerging from the ocean. The scabbard in his hand seemed to have come to life too, turning into a peerless godly sword as it emitted a brilliant sword intent. Bang bang bang! A series of terrifying explosions took place. Even the rift that was sealed off by the sun and moon sword god's sword intent began to tremble. Even the cultivators and beasts began to tremble as a result. The ground began to crack, as if a great earthquake had taken place in the woods. The forest below it, the ground, as if it was cracking. The ground began to crack. Unparalleled sword intent. The sun and moon sword god went on a killing spree as if he was unstoppable. As he swung his sword, he managed to suppress martial monarch Nanjian, the South Heaven supreme emperor, and the others. Suddenly, he raised his right hand and flicked his finger at the Xian Wind martial monarch, firing a brilliant sword intent. Crap! The Xian Wind martial monarch instantly sensed a great danger. Without hesitation, he unleashed his martial spirit and monarch heart, as well as the rare artifacts in his storage bag. Bang! However, the sword intent unleashed a destructive force that destroyed everything he had. It penetrated his chest and ended his life. The other martial monarch of the South Heaven sacred ground could feel his scalp turning numb. Before he could make a move, he suddenly felt a chill on his neck. A terrifying sword chi slashed at him and separated his head from his body. The heavens and earth are vast, with countless stars, but the sun and the moon are eternal. The sun and moon sword god remained calm after killing 2 martial monarchs in a row. His aura grew fiercer instead, as he stepped forward like an immortal from the heavens. The sword sheath in his hand buzzed vigorously. Half of it was fire, the other half was ice, the force of the sun and the moon. The sun and moon sword god's strongest move, the sun and moon sword scripture, had been executed. Such an outstanding strength. Qin Nan, who was not far away, watched the shocking battle. Despite his astonishment, he did not want to miss any part of it. It was rare to see a battle like this. If he was able to learn something from it, he would be able to benefit greatly. Bang! Bang! Another 2 shocking explosions took place. Under the overwhelming sword intent of the sun and moon sword god, The first South Heaven Supreme Emperor was shattered into pieces. Meanwhile, half of the second South Heaven Supreme Emperor's body was engulfed in flames, while the other half was sealed in ice, losing all signs of life. Even the South Heaven Chi was unable to resist the attack. As for Martial Monarch Nanjian and the other South Heaven Supreme Emperor, they were in a miserable state too. They were knocked back continuously, their bodies covered in wounds. This kind of battle was a complete one-sided slaughter. Damn it, why is the Sun and Moon Sword God here to deal with a mere Qin Nan? We've suffered a double loss this time. South Heaven God Talisman, activate. Martial Monarch Nanjian wore an unpleasant expression as he cursed in his heart. He withheld the pain in his heart and activated the only ancient talisman he had. End of chapter. Chapter 1255. The beautiful figure also began to sway and the light dimmed. Senior Sun and Moon, I'll take your slash myself. Can you let me have it? The beautiful figure's voice became incomparably gentle, intoxicating. Her jade-like hand reached out once again. Ancient runes appeared above the Xian Wind Martial Monarch and the other Martial Monarch of the South Heaven Sacred Ground, not far away. She was trying to save the two corpses. You're trying to take the two corpses away after saving the life of a man? The Sun and Moon Sword God said calmly. He flung his sleeves and fired a sword intent that encapsulated the two corpses and shattered them into pieces. If Senior insists, I have nothing else to say. However, since this young man is destined to be with me, I'll give him a gift today. I hope you'll agree to it. The glamorous figure was not surprised at all. She locked her gaze onto Qin Nan and flicked her finger. A mystical glow traveled across the rift and imprinted itself onto Qin Nan's figure, which turned into a glamorous red flower. It turned out that the two corpses were only a disguise. Her real target was Qin Nan. Qin Nan was startled. The mystical glow was too quick. It had completely exceeded his understanding, thus he had no chance of dodging it. Thank you, Senior. There's no need for you to do anything. The beautiful figure let out a laugh. Countless red lights burst out from her body and shattered inch by inch, turning into nothingness. The terrifying aura vanished as the place regained its calm for the first time. Force of destruction. Qin Nan snapped as a powerful destruction will burst out from his chest. However, this enchanting red flower still didn't move. Don't waste your energy, the flower won't harm you. You won't be able to get rid of it either. The Sun and Moon Sword God withdrew his terrifying aura and reverted to the appearance of an old man. Senior, if that's the case, what is the Frostless Martial God trying to do? Qin Nan was utterly confused. It was his first time seeing the Frostless Martial God. Why would a dignified martial god of a generation take an interest in him for no reason? It should be because of your relationship with the Heaven-Breaking Emperor. Around 1,000 years ago, when the Heaven-Breaking Emperor was born, the Frostless Martial God personally went to the Central Region and invited him 3 times. However, he rejected her every time. It was said that the Frostless Martial God had fallen in love with the Heaven-Breaking Emperor. I'm not sure if that's true. The Sun and Moon Sword God pondered for a long while before he spoke slowly. Fell in love with the Heaven-Breaking Emperor? Qin Nan was slightly shocked. He never thought that the Frostless Martial God had once loved the Heaven-Breaking Emperor. Then forget it. Qin Nan shook his head. Since that was the case, he decided to ignore the red flower for now. He would ask the Heaven-Breaking Emperor the next time he saw him. Senior, your body. Qin Nan was startled when he suddenly realized something. Through his left eye, he could see streams of energy flowing out of the Sun and Moon Sword God's body. The Sun and Moon Sword God's figure began to turn blurry too. It's only a clone to begin with, thus its power is far from enough. I could have killed Martial Monarch Nanjian, but the clone would collapse after that. The sun and moon sword god calmly glanced at Qin Nan and said, "I can only help you 2 more times. Senior, thank you very much." Qin Nan brought his fists together and said solemnly, "If it weren't for the sun and moon sword god, he would most likely be in great danger." "There's no need to say that. Just give me your contribution points." The sun and moon sword god glanced into the sky and reached out his right hand. "Senior, I don't have any contribution points left, but I still have the heavenly arcana immortal fruit. Take them." Qin Nan did not hesitate. He immediately took out all the heavenly arcana immortal fruits he had. You're quite generous." The sun and moon sword god wore a calm smile. He straightened his face and said, "Let's leave this place at once and take a detour to the wretched disaster forest. It would be troublesome if we ended up attracting the attention of other experts of the South Heaven sacred ground." "Got it." Qin Nan nodded and flew in another direction with the sun and moon sword god. After that, there were no more dangers on the road. It was a peaceful journey. 3 days later, Qin Nan and the sun and moon sword god finally arrived at one of the 6 great forbidden grounds, the wretched disaster forest. End of chapter. Chapter 1256. The sun and moon sword god's eyes flickered as a sudden thought crossed his mind. So this is what the 6 great forbidden grounds are like. I remember senior brother is the successor of the godly exterminator forbidden ground. I wonder if he's able to acquire the true succession of the godly exterminator? Qin Nan murmured. "Come, let's head inside," the sun and moon sword god said. "Sure." Qin Nan nodded. Following this, the 2 flew forward at the same time. When they stepped into the vast forest, a shocking scene took place. The runes on the 5 towering ancient trees around the 2 of them actually glowed with ancient light, turning into shocking killing moves that engulfed the 2 of them. So these runes are part of a formation. If someone barges in recklessly, it will activate the destruction domain. Qin Nan was not surprised by the sight. With a thought, a circle of black light appeared and encapsulated him and the sun and moon sword god. A series of explosions took place. Despite the strength of the attacks, they were unable to break through the destruction domain. Eternal sword of the dragon spirit. The sun and moon sword god made his move too. His hair drifted in the wind as he flicked his finger in the direction of the woods. A transparent sword intent in the shape of a giant dragon was fired deep into the woods with a series of dragon cries. "Follow the sword intent." The sun and moon sword god picked up his pace. Qin Nan immediately executed the unstoppable step and followed closely behind. Time gradually passed. After the period it took an incense to burn, the dragon-shaped sword intent finally came to a stop under a towering ancient tree. The ancient tree was different from the others. It was covered in dots of starlight, like the stars in the night sky. In addition to that, the ancient tree was moving rapidly. The sun and moon sword god and Qin Nan leapt into the air and dotted the stars on the tree trunk. The light suddenly erupted with a mysterious suction force, sucking the 2 of them in. After a few breaths, Qin Nan felt his body sink as he arrived in an unfamiliar space. Qin Nan raised his head and looked around. There was nothing special about this place compared to the outside world. The only difference was that the sky above was pitch black and filled with countless stars. "Senior, is the piece of the Kanglan tree here?" Qin Nan could not help but ask. "Of course not. This is the star-devouring space. The people of the star-devouring clan live here. We need to go deeper into the wretched disaster forest through this star-devouring space." The sun and moon sword deity said indifferently, "I will leave for 2 days to look for something. I will look for you when the time comes." After saying this, the sun and moon sword god tapped the ground with the tip of his foot. His figure transformed into a shocking sword ray and disappeared into the depths of the sky. "You want to go deeper?" It seems like the pieces of the Kanglan tree won't be easy to acquire. Qin Nan thought to himself. Without further ado, he sat down with his legs crossed and unleashed the divine battle spirit. Naturally, he could not afford to waste any time in these 2 days. He had to cultivate with all his might. Qin Nan glanced into the sky with astonishment. Through the divine battle spirit, he had discovered that apart from the presence of Qi, the place also contained streams of star force, which would bring him great benefits if he were to absorb them. Let's absorb more then. Qin Nan's heart shuddered as he fully unleashed the divine battle spirit. At that instant, with him as the center, a giant vortex was formed, which sucked in the Qi and streams of star force, resulting in a magnificent sight. Time gradually passed. A day was gone in the blink of an eye. Qin Nan had been cultivating throughout the day without being disturbed, as if there were no other living beings in the star-devouring space. However, at that instant, Qin Nan's eyes suddenly sprang open with a sharp flicker. How bold of you, to dare absorb the star force here! A furious roar suddenly exploded in the distance like a clap of thunder. 3 tremendous auras surged toward Qin Nan at a shocking pace, resulting in strong gusts of wind. Even the ground began to tremble slightly, resulting in a shocking sight. End of chapter. Chapter 1257. Qin Nan turned around and saw 2 middle-aged men and a young man with a bulky figure. Their eyes flickered and they were wearing an ancient beast hide. Their faces and bodies were covered in mysterious purple-golden runes, which formed mysterious formations of various sizes. Judging from their words, they must be from the star-devouring tribe. However, it's strange that they are only at the peak martial ancestor realm, but why are their auras comparable to the 3rd-layer martial monarch realm? Qin Nan's eyes flickered with doubts. He rose to his feet and brought his fists together with a calm expression. Fellow cultivators, is there a problem with absorbing the power of the stars? The 3 halted in their tracks upon hearing the words. They halted their attacks and glanced down at Qin Nan. Don't you know that absorbing the power of the stars here is the same as challenging our star-devouring tribe? The middle-aged man leading the group was rather old and had a dignified expression on his face. Ugh, I'm sorry, I really didn't know. Qin Nan wore a wry smile and said apologetically. The sun and moon sword god had not explained much to him before he left. When the 3 of them heard this, they looked at each other and nodded slightly. Judging from Qin Nan's reaction, he was not lying. What you've done is unforgivable, but since it's your first time, we'll let you go if you compensate us with some treasure. The middle-aged man's eyes flickered as he spoke. Absorbing the power of the stars was not a big deal, but since the star-devouring tribe was not allowed to leave the tribe, they would often use it to blackmail the cultivators who came from other tribes. That being said, the blackmail depended on the person. As long as the person's cultivation was lower than theirs, they would find all kinds of excuses to blackmail them. Compensation? Here, take this heavenly arcana immortal fruit. Qin Nan frowned. He flipped his hand and took out a heavenly arcana immortal fruit. Even though the amount of star force he had absorbed was not comparable to the heavenly arcana immortal fruit, it was true that he was at fault in the first place. He had offended the others, thus it was reasonable for him to compensate them. What a miraculous fruit! If that's the case, the 3 of them stared at each other. He planned to take the fruit and let Qin Nan go. However, at that instant, a strangely shaped blue stone on the waist of the young man on the right suddenly emitted a golden glow, which transformed into a small golden dragon, uttering a series of dragon cries. Qin Nan stared at the blue stone in astonishment. He did not pay much attention to the stone before, but now, he could feel a strange force being emitted from the stone, locking onto his right arm. The flying raindragon stone is reacting. This person's right arm is definitely a precious treasure, one that far surpasses emperor weapons. When the three of them saw this, their hearts trembled, and their eyes were filled with shock. They had found the stone by chance. They later discovered that the stone was able to sense the presence of other people's treasures. However, it was only emitting a blue or purple glow. It was their first time seeing a golden glow. "We have to get his right arm." The three quickly collected their thoughts and came to a consensus after exchanging glances with one another. "Hee, what you've done is unforgivable. Do you really think a mere fruit is enough to appease you? I can see that your right arm is quite extraordinary. It must be a treasure, right? Give me your right arm as an apology. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences." The middle-aged man leading the group and the other two uttered hollow laugh. Their auras of the third-layer martial monarch realm were unleashed, causing the surrounding space to tremble violently. Even the ground beneath them began to tremble, causing cracks to appear on it. "Aren't you satisfied with just a heavenly arcana immortal fruit? You even want my right arm? Now that the fruit is gone, you can leave now." Qin Nan's eyes turned cold. He was initially feeling sorry for them, but it was all gone now. These people wanted the heaven-shattering saber? That was simply wishful thinking. Asking us to leave? You're just a mere peak martial progenitor, yet you don't know your place. Die. The middle-aged man immediately unleashed a shocking murderous intent after hearing the words. He stomped his foot, causing the purple-golden runes on his body to emit an ancient glow. The force of the stars was immediately summoned, which transformed into giant swords that slashed downward. I see, the purple-golden runes on their bodies are able to form a formation that can control the force of the heavens and earth here. Upon seeing this, Qin Nan's eyes flickered, as his entire figure began to move. Martial tree suppression. Following a roar, the destruction martial tree and the divine battle tree rose simultaneously from his back. A boundless force of destruction and the force of the divine god of battle surged downward like two ancient mountains covered in immortal chi, which descended from the 9 heavens. What's going on? He has 2 martial trees? The 3 of them were shocked. The man before them had surpassed the rules of cultivation? Bang, bang, bang. At that instant, the giant swords were shattered into pieces. The tremendous force unleashed by the 2 martial trees suppressed the 3 cultivators, causing them to feel a great chill running down their spines. "Let's attack together." The middle-aged man collected his thoughts and let out a roar. The other 2 cultivators immediately activated the purple-golden runes on their bodies, causing the force of the stars to descend from the sky, which transformed into the illusionary figure of an ancient star with a great pressure. "Your trick might work on others, but it's useless against me." Heaven-shattering saber / Qin Nan seemed to have predicted this. His right arm exploded into the heaven-shattering saber, which fired a shocking saber glow that slashed at the rift, shattering the force unleashed by the purple-golden runes on their bodies. The dazzling stars in the sky began to shrink, as the energy of the stars began to scatter in all directions. How is this possible? How did your / sever the connection between us and the heavens and earth? Seeing this, their eyes were filled with great astonishment. It was even more shocking than when they had seen Qin Nan surpassing the rules of cultivation. The star-devouring tribe used to be humans, but their ancestors had discovered the secrets of the star-devouring space and invented the star-devouring Tao rune. When it was carved on their bodies, it was able to absorb the force of the stars to improve their cultivation. For a long time, they had been relying on the star-devouring space to extort foreign cultivators. They could even extort ordinary martial monarchs. However, the star-devouring Tao rune that countless martial monarchs had failed to penetrate was shattered by a simple / End of chapter. Chapter 1258. Don't use the star force and give him a chance to swing his saber. Use the art of the starry heavens. The middle-aged man was astounded, but he soon collected his thoughts and uttered a roar as he performed a hand seal. Art of the starry heavens! The other two also came back to their senses and hurriedly activated an ancient forbidden technique. At that instant, the purple-golden runes on their bodies emitted a purple-golden glow, as a tremendous force of stars was unleashed in their bodies, causing them to be bathed in starlight, as if they were the gods of stars. It was a forbidden art that the ancestors of the star-devouring tribe had created to prevent their star energy from being cut off. It allowed them to store the star energy in their body and activate it through the purple-golden Tao runes at crucial moments, just in case they needed it. They had never used it in the past, but now they were finally using it. A brilliant idea, but the force you're using isn't your own. It's meaningless. Qin Nan showed no sign of panic. With a kick, his figure sprang forward like a peerless saber glow. His left eye emitted a blinding glow too. Even though the purple-golden runes on their bodies were quite obscure and difficult to peek through, he was able to clearly see their secrets and weaknesses with his left eye of the divine god of battle. Once Qin Nan slashed at their weaknesses with the heaven-shattering saber, he would be able to shatter the purple-golden runes, preventing them from using their star force. For some reason, the middle-aged man could feel his scalp turning numb even though he was not afraid of Qin Nan's saber glow. A strong sense of danger rose in his heart. Run! At that instant, the middle-aged man did not hesitate to execute another forbidden technique. A formidable force of the heavenly tribulation burst out from his body, encapsulating the other two cultivators who were wearing astounded expressions. Trying to run away? With a thought, Qin Nan summoned the destruction martial tree into the sky. The Tao pattern at the center of the tree unleashed wisps of destruction that encapsulated the surroundings, causing the entire place to fall into darkness. Heavenly Star Escape! A roar resounded, and the starlight surrounding the three of them grew even brighter. It was as dazzling as a star as it charged forward, forcefully creating a gap in the sky. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared. Its speed was incomparably fast. When Qin Nan saw this scene, he was slightly taken aback. He did not expect the people of the star-devouring tribe to have mastered such a powerful forbidden art. Even a fifth-layer martial monarch would not be able to achieve the speed he had just displayed. But thinking about it carefully, it was understandable. The people of the Star Devourer clan were located in the wretched disaster forest. They could definitely explore other spaces and excavate many ancient secret skills. I was careless this time, Qin Nan thought. He quickly adjusted himself. Retracting his aura, he executed the unstoppable step and chased after the three of them. He did not insist on killing them, but the young man's boulder was quite strange. It was able to sense the presence of the heaven-shattering saber. Thus Qin Nan decided to track them down so he could observe the boulder. After all, he still had a day's time, thus he was not in a rush. Following this, Qin Nan's figure flew forward at a rapid pace. As he had completely lost track of their auras, Qin Nan had no choice but to fly forward. It was entirely up to his luck whether he would stumble into them again. An hour later, Qin Nan suddenly came to a stop. On his chest, an ancient red glow surged out and condensed into a mysterious red rune. Unlike last time, there was a faintly discernible golden dragon in the middle of the rune. The ranking of the god ranking has been adjusted. Qin Nan is now ranked 2501st. An icy, emotionless voice echoed in Qin Nan's mind. 2501st? Qin Nan's eyes flickered. He remembered Yi Feng telling him that there were 2,500 martial monarchs on the god ranking, and he was currently ranked 2,501st. In other words, he was ranked first below the martial monarch realm. Ranked first among the martial ancestor, undefeatable among the martial ancestor, that's the goal I've always been pursuing, but now that I've achieved it, I don't feel anything. Perhaps I'll only be excited when I become the top martial monarch, the undefeatable martial monarch. Qin Nan murmured. He shook his head with a smile and flew forward without further thoughts. Water flowed downwards, while men strode upwards. His future was to continuously surpass himself, to climb to first place one after another, to become invincible one after another, until he reached the peak where no one could stop him. Time gradually flowed like water. 8 hours later, a huge mountain finally appeared in front of Qin Nan. From afar, the mountain looked like an ancient dragon lying on the ground. It also looked like a peerless godly sword that split the space in half. This mountain is quite extraordinary. I might be able to find some clues about the star-devouring tribe. Qin Nan's eyes flickered as he increased his speed. At that instant, an unexpected change took place. 4 tremendous monarch glows burst out from the foot of the mountain as 4 figures sprang into the sky like deities and executed their strongest attacks, resulting in a series of deafening explosions. They were not from the star-devouring tribe, but 4 martial monarchs. In front of the 4 martial monarchs was a stone giant over 100 zhang tall. Its body was engraved with countless runes, which continuously drew the power of the stars between the heavens and earth to unleash a shocking force. However, the giant was different from the 3 martial monarchs Qin Nan had encountered. The runes on its body were purple instead of purple-golden. Isn't that? Qin Nan raised his head and was soon attracted by a glamorous figure with a formidable demonic aura. He blurted out subconsciously. Sorceress Qian Qian? The figure who was fighting against the stone giant shuddered when she heard the voice. She subconsciously turned around and saw Qin Nan in the distance. Her eyes flickered with disbelief. Qin Nan? Qin Nan collected his thoughts and grinned. He did not expect to stumble into an old acquaintance here. The figure was none other than Sorceress Qian Qian of the Middle Continent. She had been appointed as the sorceress martial monarch after inheriting the monarch horoscope and joining the Jade Lake Sacred Mountain. Break. At the same time, a thunderous roar exploded in the air. Among the 4 martial monarchs, one of the young men sprang into the sky as an 80-zhang-long pair of golden wings spread out from his back. A boundless godly glow encapsulated the tip of his fist as he threw a punch at the stone giant below, shattering it into pieces. His aura was magnificent, as if a deity had descended upon the mundane world. End of chapter. Chapter 1259. Endless Fantasy. Qin Nan, why are you here? Sorceress Qian Qian immediately went up to Qin Nan when she realized that the danger had been averted. Her face was filled with joy. It was her first time seeing someone she was familiar with since she came to the half-god region. I'm here with a senior to complete a mission, Qin Nan said with a calm smile. Qin Nan? Before Sorceress Qian Qian could speak, the other 3 cultivators were aware of the unusual situation. They immediately flew over and fixed their gazes on Qin Nan with astonishment. Qin Nan's name was well known in the half-god region. They did not expect to stumble into him here. Qin Nan glanced at the 3 cultivators. The woman among the 3 had a cultivation of the first-layer martial monarch realm. Her facial features were attractive, and her face was as white as jade. Her figure was perfect, and she was wearing an immortal dress. Despite her cold expression, she had a unique charm to her. As for the other 2 young men, they were both second-layer martial monarchs, especially the young man who had shattered the rock giant. His eyes were sharp like godly swords, and his aura had reached the peak of the second-layer martial monarch realm. They must have achieved the martial monarch realm 100 years ago. Qin Nan, allow me to introduce you. This is my senior sister, the Magic Flower Martial Monarch. These 2 are my senior brothers from the Martial Principal Sect, Martial Monarch Tianba and Martial Monarch Haoxuan. Sorceress Qian Qian immediately introduced them to Qin Nan. Nice to meet you. Qin Nan brought his fists together. Meanwhile, the three cultivators had collected their thoughts. The magic flower martial monarch glanced at Qin Nan without saying a word. It was obvious that she had no intention of talking to Qin Nan. Meanwhile, martial monarch Tianba nodded slightly without saying a word. As for martial monarch Haoshuan, his eyes flickered with disdain. For them, they were shocked when they first saw Qin Nan, but it was fine after they calmed down. Even though Qin Nan had surpassed the rules of cultivation by having 7 martial trees, making him the strongest cultivator in the martial ancestor realm, the difference between him and them was like the difference between the heavens and earth. Furthermore, Qin Nan was a 3-star enemy of the southern heavenly gate. As a matter of fact, if it weren't for the fact that sorceress Qian Qian was familiar with Qin Nan, they would most likely kidnap Qin Nan and hand him over to the South Heaven sacred ground in exchange for great rewards. A trace of embarrassment appeared on sorceress Qian Qian's pretty face when she saw this. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. However, he didn't know what to say. In her opinion, they were indeed people from 2 different worlds compared to Qin Nan. Have you seen Chen Zilai since you came to the half-god region? Qin Nan didn't care about the attitude of this group of people and asked. He was not particularly close to sorceress Qian Qian. In fact, Qin Nan was more concerned about sage Chen Zilai. Chen Zilai, sorceress Qian Qian was stunned. You're Qin Nan, right? It's a good thing for old friends to reunite, but I have to remind you that there's no need to mention some ants from the middle continent to avoid ruining the mood. Do you understand? The young man with the name Martial Monarch Haoshuan, who had shattered the giant, glanced at Qin Nan and warned him. As he had been chasing after sorceress Qian Qian, he was aware that someone with the name Sage Chen Zilai was quite close to sorceress Qian Qian in the middle continent. As such, he had decided to warn Qin Nan with his words. Haoshuan is right. Qin Nan, watch your words. Martial monarch Tianba calmly said. Senior brothers, what are you talking about? Sorceress Qian Qian frowned. Seeing her reaction, martial monarch Haoshuan and martial monarch Tianba shrugged their shoulders and remained silent. After all, they had already expressed their intentions. If this Qin Nan was being unreasonable, they would not blame them for teaching Qin Nan a lesson. Qin Nan, I'm sorry, but I have no idea where Chen Zilai is. I tried looking for him, but I couldn't find him. Sorceress Qian Qian's eyes dimmed slightly upon saying this. Until now, she still remembered how Chen Zilai had surrendered for her sake, causing his Bodhi heart to crumble. All right, if that's the case, I'll... Qin Nan nodded and prepared to leave. If sorceress Qian Qian was alone, he would not mind chatting with her for a while longer, but with the other 3 around, he was too lazy to stay any longer. Qin Nan, it's rare to see you here. Why are you leaving so soon? We've found a treasure trove, why don't you come with us? Sorceress Qian Qian glanced at Qin Nan with glittering eyes with a hint of hope. However, as soon as she finished her sentence, the magic flower martial monarch, who had been silent all this while, spoke with a cold voice. Qian Qian, this is not the right time. That's impossible, the treasure trove is extremely dangerous. With his cultivation, he'll surely be a burden to us. Martial monarch Haoshuan glanced at Qin Nan and said calmly, That's right, Qian Qian, even the 4 of us martial monarchs are in danger, not to mention the martial ancestor. Martial monarch Tianba nodded in agreement. As a matter of fact, the treasure trove they were heading to was not too dangerous. It was not a bad idea to bring Qin Nan along. However, as martial monarchs of the martial principal sect and the Jade Lake Sacred Ground, who were about to become supreme elders, they were too lazy to deal with someone in the martial ancestor realm. But sorceress Qian Qian hesitated. It's fine, Qian Qian, thanks for your help. We'll meet again next time. I'll be leaving first. Qin Nan waved his hand and said with a calm smile. He was not interested in the treasure trove to begin with. Even if he was invited, he would not go. After all, it would not be long until the sword god returned. Martial Monarch Haoxuan, the magic flower Martial Monarch, and Martial Monarch Tianba nodded slightly. This Qin Nan was quite smart. However, right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. From the distance, 3 magnificent auras surged toward Qin Nan like 3 ancient celestial dragons. Their speed was shocking, causing the entire place to tremble violently. Is that, the 5 were startled. They immediately raised their heads. Qin Nan's eyes glittered following a glimpse. He did not expect the 3 cultivators to be the 3 people of the star-devouring tribe that he had been searching for. Purple golden runes, they have purple golden runes on their bodies. They are the elders of the star-devouring tribe. Martial Monarch Haoxuan, the magic flower Martial Monarch Tianba, and sorceress Qian Qian were startled. The elders of the star-devouring tribe possessed strength equivalent to the 3rd-layer Martial Monarch realm. Besides, the 3 of them were 3rd-layer Martial Monarch. The 4 of them stood no chance against them. Wings of the spirit god, concealing in the 9 heavens. Martial Monarch Haoxuan swiftly reacted. He immediately executed an ancient technique. A pair of colorful wings spread out and encapsulated the group. It was as if their figures had vanished into thin air. They were nowhere to be seen, nor was there any sign of their presence. End of chapter. Chapter 1260. As expected of senior brother to react in time. Otherwise, we would be in great trouble. The magic flower Martial Monarch said with a pale face. Not at all, it was just a little. Martial Monarch Haoxuan's heart shuddered. He quickly spoke in a humble tone. However, before he could finish, the magic flower Martial Monarch Tianba, and sorceress Qian Qian were startled as they became aware of something. The 3 figures in the sky came to a stop and lowered their heads. Their faces were filled with disdain. Trying to fool us with a mere concealment technique? Show yourself. Otherwise, don't blame us for showing no mercy. The middle-aged man leading the group said with a disdainful look. Even though he was unable to see the exact number of people inside the wings, he could tell that there were only 2 second-layer Martial Monarchs, 2 Martial Monarchs, and a peak Martial Ancestor. We must extort a huge sum of money from them. The middle-aged man exchanged glances with the other 2 and came to a consensus. They were already feeling pressured after encountering such a terrifying person, thus they needed to vent their frustrations. On the ground below, inside a pair of wings. We've been discovered. The magic flower Martial Monarch took a step back. Her eyes flickered with fear. Even though she was a Martial Monarch, her martial heart was the most unstable among the group. It was only a coincidence that she was able to inherit the monarch horoscope. Tianba used the Sky Dipper disorderly slaughter to ambush them. Sorceress, you will attack at the same time too, let them feel threatened. Magic flower, you will be in charge of bewitching them. I'll unleash my attack when the time comes. This time, we must give it our all. We must not fall into their hands. Martial Monarch Haoxuan's heart shuddered as he yelled. Got it! Not a problem. I'll try my best. Martial Monarch Tianba, sorceress Qian Qian, and the magic flower Martial Monarch immediately responded with stern looks. At this moment, the atmosphere in the entire wing became heavy. It was as if an invisible mountain had fallen down, pressing down on them to the point of suffocation. If necessary, we'll use Qin Nan as bait and send him to his death. Martial Monarch Haoxuan mumbled to himself. His eyes flickered viciously as he uttered a roar, 1, 2, 3, together. Before he could finish the word do it, this moment, a sudden change occurred. Qin Nan, who had yet to move, suddenly emitted a powerful saber intent from his body. With a kick, he tore the wings apart and sprang into the sky like a beam of light. This, martial monarch Haoshuan, martial monarch Tianba, magic flower martial monarch, and sorceress Qian Qian, who were about to make their moves, were stunned upon seeing this. Even the hand seals that they were about to perform came to a halt. What was going on? Qin Nan actually made the first move? He was a martial ancestor. If he attacked, wouldn't he be courting death? Ha ha ha, how bold, to dare to make the first move. The three cultivators in the sky burst out laughing as the purple-golden runes on their bodies were activated, unleashing a terrifying aura. As they were about to execute their attacks, their minds exploded, as if they were struck by lightning when they took a closer look at the person in front of them. What was going on? Why was it that young man? Run! The middle-aged man was the first to react. He let out a roar and fired a formidable ray of light, encapsulating the three cultivators within it. They are running away? Martial monarch Haoshuan, martial monarch Tianba, magic flower martial monarch, and sorceress Qian Qian were astounded. In their eyes, the three elders of the star-devouring tribe, who were like bloodthirsty demons, were fleeing for their lives, as if they had stumbled into their nemesis after seeing Qin Nan, who was only a martial ancestor? Trying to run away? How naive! Qin Nan was long prepared for this. With a thought, the two martial trees on his back sprang into the sky. The destruction will and the will of the divine god of battle surged forward like a raging tide, shrouding the sky instantly. Sky-piercing star escape. The middle-aged man's roar could be heard once again. The starlight on the trio's figures skyrocketed as they collided with Qin Nan's figure like a meteor. Following a loud explosion, the trio's figures were sent flying by the impact, causing their qi and blood to become restless. Last time, Qin Nan had only unleashed a single martial tree. This time, he had unleashed both martial trees to seal off the rift. How could they possibly escape? Break! Qin Nan's hair drifted wildly. His eyes burned like torches as he swung the heaven-shattering saber in his hand. Streams of saber qi landed on the bodies of the three cultivators, shattering the weak spots of the purple-golden runes. Three cries of agony could be heard. The trio's auras began to drop rapidly. Mercy, mercy, master, please spare our lives. The trio was astounded and terrified. They immediately dropped to their knees and begged for their lives without hesitation. Their martial hearts were even weaker than the magic flower martial monarch. They could only think of saving their own lives after knowing that they had no chance of winning. What's this rock? Qin Nan waved his hand and grabbed the strange stone on the young man's waist, before he asked. This rock is called the dragon-winged rock. We found it by chance in some ancient ruins. We don't know its origin, but it will emit a glow when it comes into contact with a treasure. The stronger the treasure, the glow it emits is different, just like a dragon. The trio trembled in fear. I'll be taking the rock. Leave now. Qin Nan calmly said as he put the dragon-winged rock into his summer ring. Thank you, sir, thank you, sir. The trio felt their hearts aching when they saw the dragon-winged rock being taken away. However, they immediately fled for their lives without hesitation. This scene formed an extremely clear contrast with the previous overbearing momentum and overflowing arrogance. How is this possible? Below him, martial monarch Haoshuan, martial monarch Tianba, magic flower martial monarch, and sorceress Qian Qian were dumbfounded. Even though they had witnessed how Qin Nan had defeated the trio by destroying the purple-golden runes on their bodies, the power that the two martial trees had unleashed was immeasurable like an ocean, leaving them utterly terrified. How could a mere martial ancestor possess such power? Even Su Qingning and Zhuang Xidao, who had also surpassed the rules of cultivation, did not possess such a terrifying power when they were at the peak of the martial ancestors' cultivation. Furthermore, just a moment ago, they were actually complaining that this person would drag them down? What a joke! Qian Qian, we'll meet again. Qin Nan stood in the air and brought his fists together at Sorceress Qian before he was about to leave. Wait! A voice appeared all of a sudden. The person speaking was Martial Monarch Haoshuan. End of chapter. Chapter 1261. What's the matter? Qin Nan halted in his tracks and asked calmly without turning his head around. He did not have a good impression of this Martial Monarch Haoshuan. Martial Monarch Haoshuan's eyes flickered sternly after seeing Qin Nan's attitude. He forced a smile on his face and said, "Friend Qin Nan, I didn't expect your strength to be so outstanding. I apologize for underestimating you. By the way, is friend Qin Nan willing to tell us how to crack the secrets of the purple golden runes?" It was Martial Monarch Haoshuan's goal. If they knew how to crack the purple golden runes, they would be able to carry out their plan. They could even venture deep into the star-devouring tribe and loot their treasures. Of course, if friend Qin Nan is willing to tell us, I can recommend you to Senior Sun and Moon Sword God. With his help, you can easily join the Anti-Heaven Alliance, or even achieve a higher status in the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Am I right, Tiangang? Martial Monarch Haoshuan purposely turned around and glanced at Martial Monarch Tiangang. That's right. Senior Sun Moon Sword God came from our martial principal sect. If the two of us recommend him, he will definitely give us some face and look at you in a new light. Martial Monarch Tiangang blurted out as he collected his thoughts. I hope friend Qin Nan can help us. The magic flower Martial Monarch said with a gentle voice. She and Martial Monarch Tiangang were confused at first, but they soon realized what Martial Monarch Haoshuan was planning. Even though Qin Nan's strength was outstanding, he was still not a martial monarch. He was not a martial monarch after all. If Qin Nan had joined the Anti-Heaven Alliance, his status would not be too high. There was no way Qin Nan would reject their offer. That being said, if Qin Nan had not joined the Anti-Heaven Alliance, it would be even easier. What do you think? Martial Monarch Haoshuan smiled confidently. I'm sorry, not interested. Qin Nan shook his head. You don't agree? Great Monarch Haoshuan, Magic Flower Monarch, and Great Monarch Tiangang were stunned. A chance to earn the martial god's favor. Even though Martial Monarch Haoshuan had tricked Qin Nan into accepting it, no one would reject it, right? Furthermore, I don't mind telling you all that it was Senior Sun Moon Sword God who brought me here. Qin Nan said indifferently. The Sun and Moon Sword God brought you here? Great Emperor Haoshuan, Great Emperor Linghua, and Great Emperor Tiangang were shaken. Ha ha ha, Qin Nan, you are too funny. Even though you are very powerful, why would the Sun Moon Sword God accompany you here? Qin Nan, don't be stubborn. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Just accept it. Martial Monarch Haoshuan burst out laughing. His eyes were filled with disdain. Ha ha, Qin Nan, you really know how to indulge in fantasy. The Magic Flower Monarch and Martial Monarch Tiangang mocked too. Even for martial monarchs like them, it was impossible to meet a martial god realm expert in the martial principal sect or the Jade Lake Sacred Ground, especially one that had been born 3,000 years ago like the Sun and Moon Sword God. Only those who had achieved the 5th layer martial monarch realm or above would have a chance to be noticed by a martial god. What value did a mere Qin Nan have that the Sun and Moon Sword God would personally accompany him? However, at that instant an unexpected change took place. A terrifying aura burst out from the sky and flew toward the mountain range at a shocking pace. The beasts in the mountain range began to feel uneasy as if they had sensed something. Something terrifying is coming, scatter at once. Martial Monarch Haoshuan snapped with a startled expression. The Magic Flower Monarch, Martial Monarch Tiangang, Sorceress Qian, and Qin Nan did not waste any time. They quickly backed away with a kick. In the blink of an eye, a monstrous cold light landed where they were just a moment ago. Bang! With a deafening bang, countless huge cracks appeared on the ground, and a huge crater that was several miles long appeared. In the middle of the crater, there was an extremely simple scabbard. It emitted an extremely terrifying aura, causing countless gales to blow in all directions. What's that? Martial Monarch Haoxuan, Martial Monarch Tiangang, the Magic Flower Monarch, and the others were astounded. How could such a terrifying scabbard appear out of nowhere from the heavens? Whoosh! The scabbard suddenly emitted a ray of light, which transformed into a magnificent figure, causing the surrounding sky to darken. Rhino, wait, Senior Sun and Moon Sword God? Martial Monarch Haoxuan and Martial Monarch Tiangang were even more astounded when they saw the figure. Previously at the Martial Principal Sect, they were fortunate enough to see the Sun and Moon Sword God during the monarch bestowment ceremony. They could still remember his undefeatable aura that caused the heavens and earth to tremble. As such, they immediately recognized the Sun and Moon Sword God as soon as he showed up. Sun and Moon Sword God? The Magic Flower Monarch and Sorceress Qian were thunderstruck. You know me. The Sun and Moon Sword God turned around and glanced down at the four cultivators. Senior Sun and Moon Sword God, I'm Martial Monarch Haoxuan. I've met you at the monarch bestowment ceremony. You even gave us the monarch titles. Martial Monarch Haoxuan and Martial Monarch Tiangang spoke with trembling voices. They were from the Martial Principal Sect, thus they were familiar with the Sun and Moon Sword God. As such, they had completely lost their composure. Oh, I don't know you. The Sun and Moon Sword God showed no mercy. Martial Monarch Haoxuan and Martial Monarch Tiangang's expressions froze. Don't waste your time with these dubious people of the Martial Principal Sect. By the way, hold this scabbard, the Martial Monarch tomb has been opened. The Sun and Moon Sword God turned to Qin Nan and said with a frown, Martial Monarch tomb? Qin Nan was startled. This is the wretched disaster forest, the place where the martial monarchs were buried. It's also known as the Tomb of Eras. According to my speculation, the thing you're looking for is in the hands of one of the authorities that has been buried. The Sun and Moon Sword God said. I see. Hearing this, Qin Nan immediately went forward and grabbed the scabbard. Countless streams of sword intent were unleashed, encapsulating his figure, which transformed into a shocking sword glow that soared into the sky and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Martial Monarch Haoxuan, Martial Monarch Tiangang, and the Magic Flower Monarch stared at the scene with blank faces. Everything that had just happened was like a dream to them. What Qin Nan had said was all true. Sorceress Qian blurted out after seeing this. A moment later, a smile appeared on her face. As expected of the person that even Chern Zilai was impressed by. An emperor was still an emperor. He always managed to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. End of chapter. Chapter 1262. 80 breaths later, Qin Nan arrived at a mysterious place in the star-devouring space under the guidance of the ancient scabbard. In front of him stood the Sun and Moon Sword God in the air with a magnificent aura. In front of him stood a giant pitch-black door over 50 zhang tall. Inside the door stood a twisted black glow with flickering runes. It was impossible to see clearly. Wisps of black light were emitted from the door, which penetrated the rift nearby. If they were given enough time, the whole place would be dyed in darkness. Let's go inside, the Sun and Moon Sword God said. He waved his hand and withdrew the scabbard before stepping into the door. Even though Qin Nan had many questions in his mind, he did not overthink it and followed the Sun and Moon Sword God. After stepping into the door, Qin Nan could feel his figure shuddering. It felt like a giant hand had reached out from nowhere, grabbing his figure and bringing him to an unfamiliar place. When his feet landed on the ground, he could feel a great chill rising in his heart. Qin Nan's figure tensed instinctively. He activated his left eye and glanced ahead. With a single glance, even with his mental fortitude, he was still greatly impacted. In front of him and the sun and moon sword god was a path emitting a rotten aura, as if it had come from an ancient battlefield. On both sides of the path floated 36 ancient palaces, tombs, and cemeteries over a few hundred zhang tall and wide. Each entrance had a 10-zhang-long wooden plaque, each with a few ancient words written on it. They were the tombs of the inner demon martial monarch, the soul sacrifice martial monarch, the forbidden magic martial monarch, the heaven transformation martial monarch, the heaven destruction martial monarch, the wicked hatchet martial monarch, the heaven cycle martial monarch, etc. The 36 palaces, tombs, and cemeteries were all the tombs of the martial monarchs. In addition to that, deep inside the path were 5 towering mountains over a few thousand zhang tall. Although they were shrouded in a white mist, making it impossible to see them clearly, they somehow felt more intimidating than the tombs of the 36 martial monarchs. 1. All of a sudden, the formations in the 8 martial monarch tombs were activated on their own. A faint, terrifying aura burst out from the tombs, as if the 36 martial monarchs were still alive, and were about to awaken. Qin Nan's eyes revealed a hint of surprise. This was because he saw a majestic life force. Did that mean the 36 martial monarchs were still alive? The 36 martial monarchs are indeed dead, but their flesh is perfectly preserved. On top of that, with the disaster martial god's law-defying means, even after 15,000 years, only a little of their will has dissipated. They are still extremely strong. The sun and moon sword god said calmly. 15,000 years ago. Were they the great emperors from 15,000 years ago? In other words, they all achieved the martial monarch realm on their own? When Qin Nan heard this, he immediately thought of a problem. He remembered the sun and moon sword god mentioning that 15,000 years ago, the cultivators of the Kanglan continent were able to achieve the martial monarch realm on their own. Not really, as they did not manage to refine the Tao pattern 15,000 years ago. Besides, after the great change that took place 15,000 years ago, they were suppressed too. The sun and moon sword god shook his head. So it turns out that to achieve the martial monarch realm on their own, they would need to refine the Tao pattern. Qin Nan mumbled to himself. He could not help but exclaim as if he had just recalled something. He finally realized why the 6 great forbidden grounds were only second to the 3 great factions. As a matter of fact, the 6 great forbidden grounds were even stronger than the 3 great factions in the ancient era. A single martial monarch tomb contained 36 martial monarchs. Even though these martial monarchs were all dead, their wills still remained, and their flesh was perfectly fine, allowing them to continue fighting. Besides, this was only a part of the wretched disaster forest. Senior, where are the pieces of the Kanglan tree? Qin Nan withdrew his thoughts and asked. Qin Nan, first of all, it's going to be difficult to get the pieces of the Kanglan tree. I won't be able to provide you with much help. You'll have to rely on yourself. The sun and moon sword god frowned and said as a thought crossed his mind. Senior, you've already helped me a lot by bringing me here. Qin Nan shook his head and said. The sun and moon sword god obviously had his own reasons for not bringing him to the pieces of the Kanglan tree. Besides, the sun and moon sword god had indeed helped him a lot along the way. For example, without the sword god's help, he would not have been able to enter the martial monarch tomb. At the end of the path, there's a boulder. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. It is called the Ancient Heaven Stone Tablet. When the time comes, place your hand on it and test it. If you pass the test, the master of one of the 5 mountains will give you the pieces of the Kanglan tree. Of course, after you get the pieces of the Kanglan tree, you'll have to help the master of the mountain complete a quest. The sun and moon sword god pointed forward. His deep eyes glanced at the 5 magnificent mountains, as if he was looking into the eyes of the mysterious existence in the mountains. Qin Nan's eyes flickered. It was completely different from what he had expected. He did not expect to be tested again. Forget it, it doesn't matter. Qin Nan shook his head to clear his thoughts. With a kick, he flew forward. Even though he had many doubts in his mind, either way, his first priority was to acquire the pieces of the Kanglan tree. After flying for a few breaths, Qin Nan slowly came to a stop. As he expected, at the end of the path stood a 10-zhang tall boulder. The boulder was covered in ancient marks, as if it had been attacked by countless powerful artifacts. Qin Nan took a deep breath to calm his thoughts. He went forward and placed his hand on the boulder. As he was about to take the test, at the back of the path. Haha, take a guess, how far do you think the kid will go? In my opinion, it should be the Dharma rare phenomenon. A burst of laughter could be heard coming from the heart demon martial monarch's tomb. The Dharma rare phenomenon should be quite difficult, right? That Zhuang Xidao and Su Qingning, the 2 geniuses who had surpassed the rules of cultivation, and the successors of the wretched disaster forest, had only achieved the Dharma contending realm. A doubtful voice could be heard coming from the soul-sacrificing martial monarch's tomb. Soul-sacrificing, I don't think so. Didn't Senior Sun and Moon Sword God mention that the kid has 2 martial trees and has refined the Tao pattern? His martial skill talent is outstanding too. His result will surely surpass Zhuang Xidao, Su Qingning, and the successors. A voice could be heard coming from the mystical forbidden martial monarch's tomb. In my opinion, it should be the Dharma rare phenomenon. The kid's martial skill talent and martial skill attainment greatly surpass theirs. Haha, that's right, soul-sacrificing martial monarch, you've misjudged him. End of chapter. Chapter 1263. The voices were the voices of the martial monarchs in the tombs. If Qin Nan were here, he would discover that the voices were coming from the 8 martial monarch tombs that seemed to have woken up when the formation was activated. As for the remaining 26 martial monarch tombs, they fell into a dead silence. Humph, in my opinion, it's at most the rare phenomenon of 1,000 laws. If that's the case, doesn't that mean the kid can trigger the disaster rare phenomenon? The Soul Tribute martial monarch said in a displeased tone after being denied by the crowd. Haha, that's impossible. The rest of the martial monarchs burst out laughing. Since ancient times, none of the geniuses that had entered the martial monarch tombs had ever triggered the disaster rare phenomenon. Although Qin Nan had indeed impressed them, and no one in their era was comparable to Qin Nan's talent, it was impossible for him to trigger the rare phenomenon of the disaster formation. That being said, the kid is a little too late. If he had come before Zhuang Xidao, Su Qingning, and the others, he would have triggered the rare phenomenon. At least 20 martial monarchs would have woken up by now. Martial monarch Zhomia said while shaking his head. It's indeed too late. The rest of the martial monarchs exclaimed, including the Soul Tribute martial monarch. It doesn't matter if he's late. Even though the benefits are greater with more martial monarchs waking up, it's already a great success to have the piece of the Kanglan tree. The Sun and Moon Sword God said calmly. You're right, Master. The 8 martial monarchs felt a little awkward. Why did they feel like they were being looked down upon? However, it was normal for the martial god realm experts to be looked down upon. There's a reaction. The Sun and Moon Sword God's eyes flickered. Hearing this, the 8 martial monarchs were startled. They immediately reached out with their divine sense. At the end of the path, the ancient heavens boulder in front of Qin Nan began to buzz as it emitted wisps of light. A few breaths later, the light suddenly became blinding and transformed into various illusions, including a world of ice and snow, ancient volcanoes, etc. There were more than 10,000 of them, resulting in a spectacular sight. The rare phenomenon of 1,000 laws. Sure enough, it's the Dharma phenomenon. Haha, soul tribute, you guessed wrong, didn't you? The voices of the 8 martial monarchs echoed once again. It's not over yet, the sun and moon sword god suddenly said. There was a rare glimmer of light in his deep eyes. The 8 martial monarchs were startled when they heard this. They immediately glanced at Qin Nan. The tens of thousands of rays of light suddenly shattered and turned into strands of black gas. The strands of black gas condensed into a vast and enormous black cloud. An incomparably astonishing will of calamity was emitted from the black cloud. It was as if the appearance of the black clouds signified the arrival of a calamity. All misfortunes would follow one after another. Disaster phenomenon? The 8 great emperors were shocked. They never expected that Qin Nan would really trigger the disaster anomaly. At that instant, 3 of the tombs among the 36 martial monarch tombs suddenly activated their formations and glowed brightly. Someone actually triggered the disaster phenomenon? The voices of the 3 martial monarchs echoed in the air. Initially, they were not too bothered by it, but Qin Nan's performance was too outstanding, causing them to be startled. However, at that instant, an unexpected change took place. The enormous black cloud began to vibrate vigorously. Following a loud explosion, it exploded into countless black dots. The black dots danced in the air and gathered together, slowly forming a pitch-black beast with muscular limbs and a tremendous aura of calamity. Roar! The beast uttered a roar into the sky. The spacious space began to tremble. Countless auras of calamity burst out from it like a surging tide. Is that the beast of calamity? The voices of the 11 martial monarchs began to tremble at that instant. In addition to that, among the 36 martial monarch tombs, 8 of them were activated one after another. The martial monarch tombs began to emit a glow as the martial monarch intent within them was awakened. There were a total of 19 martial monarch intents that had been awakened. The main reason they were shocked was that the ancient beast of calamity had only existed in legends. They had never seen it before. Very well, you didn't embarrass me. The sun and moon sword god glanced at the 5 mountains. His lips curled upward for the first time. At this moment, he was enlightened. Didn't that guy ask you to hand over the piece of the Kanglan tree? Why weren't you willing? Now, even the beast of calamity had been triggered. It was obvious how much the wretched disaster forest had acknowledged Qin Nan. So, are you still happy about it? Qin Nan was completely unaware of the astonishment of the sun sword god and the 19 martial monarchs. Qin Nan could not help but feel nervous when he saw the beast of calamity. During the trial, Qin Nan had discovered that the ancient heavenly boulder was extremely strange. It was like a black hole, emitting a shocking absorption force that almost sucked his 2 martial trees and the divine battle spirit out. Now that he had triggered the pitch-black ancient beast, he was not sure if he had met the requirements that the senior had mentioned. It has to work. Qin Nan clenched his fists tightly. However, little did Qin Nan know if the sun and moon sword god and the 19 martial monarchs knew what he was thinking, their lips would twitch. The ancient beast of calamity that had surpassed the legends and triggered the unprecedented ancient beast of calamity, yet he was still worried that he would not meet the requirements? Qin Nan, you've triggered the ancient beast of calamity, thus you've met the requirements. Take this piece of the Kanglan tree and keep this jade badge. If I need your help in the future, please lend me a hand. At that instant, an imperious voice could be heard coming from one of the mountains, entering Qin Nan's mind. If one were to take a closer look, they would be able to tell that the voice was filled with astonishment. Whoosh! Following this, 2 rays of light pierced through the air, which turned out to be a storage bag and a jade badge. Such a terrifying voice. Could it be that the owner of these mountains is a martial god realm expert? Could it be that these 5 mountains are the tombs of martial gods, just like the tombs of martial monarchs? Qin Nan's heart shuddered. If these were the tombs of the 5 martial gods, this wretched disaster forest was too terrifying. Thank you, Senior. If you need my help, I won't hesitate to help. Qin Nan soon collected his thoughts and blurted out. He waved his hand and retrieved the storage bag and the jade badge. At that instant, the ring on Qin Nan's finger began to vibrate slightly, emitting a blinding glow. Qin Nan's figure tensed upon seeing this, as he peeked into the ring with his divine sense. With a single glance, his heart began to race, and the blood in his body began to boil. The piece of the Kanglan tree was the size of 3 palms. Even the 2 pieces he had found before were incomparable in size. With such a piece of the Kanglan tree, he would surely be able to merge his 2 martial trees. Qin Nan, this is your chance. Merge your martial trees right here and now. The Sun and Moon Sword God yelled. End of chapter. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.